Hello, my friend. Tonight we embark on a journey that will tickle your nose, perhaps even turn your stomach, but most certainly open your eyes to a forgotten world. Imagine, if you will, stepping out of your perfectly climate-controlled, air-freshened home and straight into the bustling, teeming, odoriferous heart of a medieval European city. You're immediately hit by a wall of scents, not just one or two, but a symphony of smells that modern noses simply aren't equipped to process. The air itself feels thick, a palpable haze of human and animal, decay and creation, all swirling together. You breathe it in, and for a split second, you understand. You understand that this isn't just history on a page. It's a living, breathing, smelling reality that was inescapable. And honestly, you probably won't survive this journey unscathed, at least not olfactorily. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a muddy, uneven street, the cobblestones beneath your worn boots slick with something unidentifiable. It's not just the mud, you realize, as a particularly pungent gust of wind washes over you. It's a cocktail of organic matter. Everywhere you look, everywhere you smell, the medieval world asserts its presence. You're in a time when the very concept of fresh air as we understand it simply didn't exist. Not in a densely populated area anyway. The air was a constant, swirling soup of whatever was happening around you. Think for a moment about your own neighborhood on trash day, multiplied by 1,000, with no regular collection schedule, and you're getting close to the baseline. This isn't just about things being a bit musky. It's about a fundamental difference in the sensory landscape. 1. Mainstream. Historical fact we know is that medieval cities often lacked organized waste disposal systems as we know them today. There were no centralized sewage networks that whisked away waste to treatment plants. Instead, many households simply threw their refuse, everything from food scraps to human excrement, directly into the streets or into open cesspits. This wasn't necessarily due to a lack of understanding of hygiene, but rather a lack of the infrastructure and governmental coordination needed to implement large-scale solutions. Imagine walking down what passes for a main thoroughfare and having someone's chamber pot contents splash near your feet from an upstairs window. It sounds like a bad comedy sketch, but it was a very real, very common occurrence. Some cities did try to enact ordinances against this, but enforcement was often spotty at best. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some medieval towns actually had gong farmers, or rakers, whose job it was to clear out cesspits and remove night soil. These individuals, as you might imagine, had one of the least desirable and most malodorous professions of the age. They usually worked at night, under the cover of darkness, to transport the waste out of the city, often to be used as fertilizer. In fields, it was a dirty, thankless, but absolutely essential job. Imagine the smell clinging to them, even after their shift was over. You'd probably smell them coming long before you saw them. It's one of those jobs that truly highlights the nose-holding reality of the era. You might think, well, at least someone was cleaning. And yes, they were. But it was more like bailing out a leaky boat with a teacup, rather than plugging the hole entirely. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of strong perfumes and aromatic herbs was primarily for aesthetic pleasure, or a desperate attempt to mask the pervasive stench of daily life, while some evidence suggests a genuine appreciation for pleasant scents. it's hard to deny the practical benefits of something like a Pandora ball of fragrant substances carried or worn when you're surrounded by the aroma of open sewers and unwashed bodies. You might carry a nosegay, a small bouquet of sweet-smelling flowers, not just because it looks pretty, but because it provides a convenient, personal air filter against the onslaught of less desirable odors. It's like carrying a tiny, wearable car air freshener. But instead of vanilla or new car smell, you're hoping for lavender or rose to save you from, well, everything else. The overall smellscape of medieval Europe was a complex tapestry woven from 1,000 different threads. It was the sharp temps of urine, the cloying sweetness of decaying refuse, the musky scent of unwashed wool, the earthy aroma of damp straw, and the smoky haze from countless hearths. It was the metallic temps of blood from the butcher's stall, mingling with the yeasty smell of bread baking and the acrid whiff of a tanning pit downwind. You couldn't escape it. It seeped into your clothes, into your hair. It coated the inside of your nose and throat. It was simply the air you breathed. And this wasn't just in the big cities. Even in smaller towns and villages, where perhaps the human population density was lower, you still had livestock living in close proximity, muddy paths, and the same lack of sophisticated waste management. The rural aromas might be different, perhaps more earthy and animalistic, but no less potent. You're realizing now that the concept of good smells and bad smells was perhaps a much more fluid concept for medieval people, simply because the sheer volume of bad was so overwhelming. Your modern nose, accustomed to highly sanitized and often artificially scented environments, would be in for a rude awakening. You might even find yourself wishing for a bit of that new car smell from your own time, just for a moment of olfactory reprieve. But alas, no such luck here. You're in the thick of it, literally. As you pick your way through the street, the air shifts, bringing a new layer to the pervasive scent symphony. You pass by a communal well, its waters looking murky, reflecting the grey sky. There's a faint, stagnant smell rising from it, a hint of decay that makes you instinctively hold your breath for a moment. This isn't the clear, chlorinated water you're used to. It's drawn directly from local sources, often contaminated by runoff from the very streets you're walking on. You might glimpse someone drawing water for drinking, perhaps hoping that boiling it will magically cleanse all impurities. Good luck with that. You realize that even the most fundamental elements of life, like water, carry their own distinct, often unsettling, aroma in this era. The idea of personal hygiene in the Middle Ages is one of those topics that instantly conjures images of unwashed masses and rampant body odor. And honestly, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. Bathing, while not as frequent or as universally practiced as in some earlier civilizations like the Romans, certainly wasn't unheard of. Public bathhouses existed in some larger towns and cities, though their popularity and cleanliness varied greatly over time and region. For most common folk, a full-body bath might be an infrequent luxury, perhaps once a week, or even less often, depending on access to water, fuel for heating it, and the sheer effort involved. People would often make do with sponge baths, washing hands and face more regularly. So, while you might not have smelled a pristine, soapy freshness, people weren't necessarily living in a perpetual state of grime. They just had different standards, or perhaps different priorities. It's hard to prioritize a good soak when you're worried about starvation or plague, isn't it? It's fascinating to consider that some medieval medical texts actually warned against frequent bathing, believing it could open the pores and make one more susceptible to disease. This perspective, born of limited scientific understanding, certainly didn't encourage a culture of daily scrubbing. You might find this concept utterly baffling, given our modern obsession with antibacterial everything. But for them, the world was a mysterious place, and sometimes less intervention seemed like the safer bet. It's the medieval equivalent of your aunt telling you not to go out with wet hair, but with potentially life-threatening consequences. A common approach to personal cleanliness involved what was available. Think about the simple, harsh lye soaps that were sometimes made from animal fats and ash. These weren't your delicate, moisturizing bars. They were industrial-strength degreasers, probably leaving your skin feeling tight and dry. And forget deodorant, that was centuries away. Instead, people often relied on strong herbs and spices, either tucked into their clothing or worn in small sachets, to try and combat inevitable body odors. You might even find yourself reaching for a sprig of rosemary or a small pouch of lavender, just to get a moment of fragrant relief from your own burgeoning medieval musk. It's a bit like trying to stop a flood with a teacup, but every little bit helps, right? The contrast between classes was also evident in their olfactory signatures. While the peasant in the field might smell of sweat, soil, and animals, the noble in their castle might have a distinct odor, too, perhaps one tinged with expensive, imported spices, stale wine, and the less frequent, but still present, unwashedness. You might think wealth guaranteed freshness, but luxury in the medieval period didn't always translate to modern standards of hygiene. Their idea of luxury might be fine linens, exotic foods, and lavish clothing, rather than daily hot showers. In fact, many a noble, especially those traveling, would have been just as exposed to the general grunginess of the roads and inns as anyone else. So, don't imagine a pristine palace with perfumed air. It was probably just a slightly more fragrant version of the general sense cape. We can surmise that the concept of cleanliness was more about appearances and ritual than germ theory. Clothes might be brushed down, hair combed, and faces washed. But the idea of scrubbing away invisible microbes simply wasn't on the radar. This reliance on surface-level cleanliness meant that while efforts were made, the underlying causes of pervasive odors remained. It's a bit like trying to hide a massive pile of dirty laundry by spraying it with air freshener. The smell might be momentarily masked, but the source is still there. As you consider all of this, you realize that your own perceptions of body odor and cleanliness are entirely shaped by your modern experience. You're used to a world where a quick shower and a squirt of antiperspirant make you socially acceptable. Here, those tools don't exist, and the definition of socially acceptable is radically different. You might be standing next to someone who hasn't had a proper bath in weeks, and you wouldn't even bat an eye because everyone else smells similar. Your nose, initially overwhelmed, would probably begin to adjust, desensitizing itself to the constant assault of medieval aromas. It's a survival mechanism, really. Your brain simply decides, okay, this is the new normal, let's just breathe. It's an involuntary adaptation that probably saved countless medieval noses from constant distress. You're already feeling your own senses dulling, a subtle shift in your perception, as if your olfactory receptors are muting the sharper notes of the medieval symphony. You continue your perambulation through the medieval city, and the olfactory assault evolves, growing more intense, more layered. The general background hum of human and animal effluvia is now punctuated by sharper, more distinct notes. You're approaching a particularly dense part of town, where the buildings lean precariously towards each other, almost kissing overhead. plunging the narrow lanes into perpetual gloom. This architectural style, known as jettied buildings, was practical for maximizing space, but it also had an unintended consequence. It amplified the odors trapped below. Sunlight, a natural disinfectant, struggled to penetrate these canyons, leaving damp, dark pockets where stagnant air and unseen filth could fester and multiply their potent aromas. Medieval cities were, in essence, vast, open-air landfills operating on a continuous basis. While some efforts were made to keep major thoroughfares somewhat clear, the sheer volume of refuse produced by a growing urban population simply overwhelmed any rudimentary systems in place. You'd see household waste, everything from kitchen scraps to ash from fires, broken pottery and discarded building materials, tossed directly into the street. Animals, like pigs and dogs, often roamed freely, acting as informal, though highly inefficient, garbage disposals, routing through the refuse. This presence of animals, while sometimes useful, also added their own distinct contribution to the overall stench, as they too left their droppings wherever they pleased. It was a cycle of waste production and slow, often incomplete, decomposition. Right on your doorstep, there's a subtle, almost sweet, but fundamentally putrid scent that drifts from the gutters, which aren't really gutters in the modern sense, but simply channels for liquid waste. This liquid, a slurry of rainwater, domestic wastewater, and God knows what, seep into the unpaved ground or collect in stagnant pools. Imagine the conditions after a heavy rain. The streets would become rivers of foul-smelling liquid, pushing accumulated filth into every nook and cranny. You'd have to lift your skirts or trousers high, carefully picking your way to avoid splashing through the worst of it. It's an immersive experience, whether you want it or not. A peculiar feature of urban medieval life was the sheer proximity of everything. Houses were crammed together, often sharing walls. Workshops and businesses operated directly adjacent to residences. This meant that the specific smells of trades permeated the residential areas. Think of a tanner's pit, with its acrid, pungent odor of decaying hides and strong chemicals, situated just a stone's throw from a baker's shop. While the aroma of fresh bread might momentarily tantalize your senses, it would quickly be overwhelmed by the nearby industrial effluvia. This constant interplay of contrasting, often clashing, smells was a defining characteristic of the medieval urban soundscape. You were never far from the source of some powerful and often unpleasant scent. Many historians debate whether the frequent outbreaks of disease in medieval cities were directly attributable solely to the lack of sanitation and the pervasive smells, or if other factors like poor nutrition and limited medical knowledge played an equally significant role. While the connection between filth and disease wasn't understood in terms of germ theory, the general intuition that foul smells, miasma, were associated with sickness was common. People might have tried to avoid the most noxious areas, not just because they smelled awful, but because there was an instinctive understanding that sickness seemed to breed there. You might find yourself instinctively holding a cloth to your nose, or stepping wide around a particularly pungent puddle, driven by an unarticulated sense of self-preservation. As you navigate this dense urban environment, you notice the occasional, small garden patch, perhaps within the courtyard of a larger house. Even these pockets of greenery, while offering a visual respite, contributed to the overall smellscape. They might contain kitchen herbs, offering a fleeting, pleasant aroma of mint or rosemary, but they also likely harbored composting scraps, adding an earthy, decaying note or were fertilized with animal manure, bringing its own distinct, powerful scent. So even nature within the city was often imbued with the pervasive odors of human activity. It's a constant reminder that in this era, the lines between clean and dirty, natural and man-made, were far blurrier than you're accustomed to. Every breath you take is a lesson in medieval reality. Leaving the claustrophobic confines of the urban core, you begin to experience a shift in the ambient aroma as you move towards the city's outskirts, where the countryside begins to assert itself. The intense, concentrated putrefaction of the city starts to dissipate, replaced by a broader, more expansive palette of smells. You notice the air feels a little lighter, though certainly not clean by your standards. Instead, it's infused with the deep, earthy scent of damp soil, the sharp, almost medicinal taints of wood smoke, and the surprisingly sweet, yet ever-present, aroma of animal life. This is the authentic scent of medieval agriculture, a sensory tapestry woven from different threads, but no less potent than its urban counterpart. The most dominant aroma in the medieval countryside was undoubtedly that of animal manure, farm. Animals, cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens, horses, were the backbone of agrarian society. They lived in close proximity to human dwellings, often in barns or sheds attached to houses, or even in simpler homes, sharing living space during colder months. Their waste, a valuable resource for fertilizing fields, was regularly collected and spread. So, as you walk past fields, you'd be met with a powerful, pungent, and utterly unmistakable smell of fresh or recently spread dung. It wasn't just a fleeting whiff. It was a pervasive undercurrent to every breath you took in the open air. You might think of it as a natural, albeit overwhelming, part of the landscape, far removed from the sterile, plastic-wrapped fertilizer bags of your time. Adding to this agricultural bouquet was the pervasive smell of wood smoke. Every home, every cottage, every small farmstead relied on wood for heating, cooking, and light. Chimneys, if they existed at all, were often rudimentary, and many homes simply had a hole in the roof to let out the smoke. This meant that the scent of burning wood, sometimes acrid and biting, other times rich and comforting, hung heavy in the air, especially during colder months or at mealtimes. You might even find your eyes watering from the persistent haze, and your clothes absorbing the smoky aroma, making you smell like a perpetual bonfire. It's a smell that, paradoxically, could be both unpleasant in its intensity and reassuring. In its indication of warmth and life, a less obvious but equally present smell came from the very ground itself. The medieval landscape was largely unpaved, consisting of dirt paths and muddy tracks. After a rain, the distinct, loamy scent of wet earth, churned by countless footsteps and animal hooves, would rise. This might be mixed with the smell of decaying leaves in autumn or the fresh, green scent of new growth in spring, but always underpinned by the damp, organic richness of the soil. It reminds you that in this era, humans were far more intimately connected to the cycles of nature, and thus to its unfiltered smells, than we are today. Many historians ponder how much the widespread exposure to these potent, natural odors influenced medieval people's sense of smell and their tolerance for strong scents. Did they simply become desensitized to what you would consider overwhelming? Or did their olfactory senses remain sharp, allowing them to differentiate subtle nuances within this pervasive baseline? It's probable that their baseline for what constituted a normal smell was significantly higher than yours. making them less prone to recoiling from what you might find offensive. For them, the smell of manure was not just a smell, but the scent of sustenance, of fertility, of life itself. Beyond the farm animals, the wild also contributed its own aromas. You might catch the musky scent of wild game in the nearby woods, or the damp, earthy smell of mushrooms after a rain. Ponds and small streams, often slow-moving and filled with decaying vegetation, would release their own stagnant, marshy odors. It's a reminder that even outside the concentrated human settlements, nature itself was a vibrant and often pungent source of smells. Finally, consider the seasonal variations. In spring, you'd have the fresh, green scent of burgeoning life, mixed with the dampness of thawing earth. Summer would bring the dry, dusty smell of parched fields, perhaps with the sweet scent of hay being cut, but also the intensifying aroma of animal waste under the hotter sun. Autumn would be dominated by the smell of decaying leaves, and the harvest, winter, while perhaps offering some respite from certain strong smells due to freezing temperatures, would emphasize the pervasive wood smoke from hearths and the sharp, clean scent of frost. The countryside, like the city, was a dynamic, ever-changing olfactory landscape, a constant reminder of the rhythms of the natural world and the intimate connection of human life to it. You realize that to truly understand the medieval world, you must engage all your senses, and especially your nose. The journey through the medieval landscape continues, and as you navigate the narrow pathways, you become acutely aware of yet another pervasive scent source: human waste. It's an undeniable, ever-present reality of life in an era without modern plumbing or widespread sanitation infrastructure. The methods of dealing with human excrement were as varied as they were often rudimentary, and each contributed its own distinct, unforgettable layer to the overall medieval smellscape. You'll find yourself holding your breath more often than not, a natural, involuntary reaction to the constant assault. One of the most common and direct methods of human waste disposal, particularly in rural areas or smaller towns, was simply defecating outdoors. People would relieve themselves in fields, alleys, or even just behind their homes. This waste would then be left to decompose naturally, or perhaps be partially consumed by free-roaming pigs or other animals. While seemingly primitive, this method leveraged natural processes, but it also meant that areas immediately surrounding settlements were perpetually infused with the strong, pungent odor of human feces, especially during warmer, wetter weather. Imagine trying to enjoy a pleasant stroll through what you might consider a natural landscape, only to be constantly assailed by this specific, unmistakable stench. It's a stark reminder of the lack of distinction between public and private spaces for such biological necessities in more urban settings, and for those with even a modicum of means. The chamber pot was a ubiquitous item. This simple ceramic or metal vessel served as the indoor toilet. Once full, its contents, known as night soil, had to be disposed of. The easiest, most common method was to simply empty it out a window into the street below. You might hear a quick shout of God, a corruption of the French Gardes, "Lo, watch out for the water," before a cascade of urine and feces splattered onto the cobblestones or unfortunate passers-by. This practice, while convenient for the household, was a major contributor to the putrid rivers of waste that often flowed down medieval streets. It meant that even if you avoided stepping in a puddle, you might still get a dose from above. It was a constant, almost playful, hazard of urban life. For slightly more organized waste management, particularly in larger homes, monasteries, and castles, Privies or garde-robes were employed. These were essentially latrines, often built as extensions from walls, with a shaft that dropped the waste directly into a moat, a river, or a dedicated cesspit below. While seemingly more advanced, these still contributed to local pollution. The moats around castles, for instance, were not just defensive features, but often acted as open sewers, becoming incredibly foul-smelling, especially during dry spells when the water wasn't regularly flushed. You can imagine the powerful, concentrated stench wafting up from such places, a testament to centuries of accumulated waste. It's enough to make you reconsider your own modern plumbing with immense gratitude. Historians still debate the true impact of these waste disposal practices on public health. While germ theory was unknown, the sheer volume of organic matter and human waste in close proximity to living spaces undoubtedly contributed to the spread of disease. Was it the miasma, the bad air from decaying matter, that made people sick, as they believed? Or was it the unseen microorganisms thriving in such conditions? It's likely a combination, but the visible and tangible filth and its accompanying stench was certainly a constant reminder of the precariousness of life and health in the medieval period. Then there were the cesspits and A cesspit was a covered hole in the ground, often lined, designed to collect waste from privies or direct human use. Middens were essentially garbage heaps, often containing human and animal waste, mixed with other household refuse. These were often located in backyards or communal spaces, and while they centralized waste somewhat, they also created localized pockets of intense, decaying odors. Imagine trying to have a pleasant meal in your garden with the distinct, sweet and sour aroma of your neighborhood midden wafting over. It's a clear indication that privacy and olfactory comfort, as we define them, were alien concepts. You find yourself wondering about the sheer quantity of flies. They would have been ubiquitous, drawn by the omnipresent organic matter, buzzing around every street, every market stall, every open window. Their presence would not only have been visually irritating, but would also have contributed to the overall sensory experience, perhaps even carrying the scent of their latest landing place from one area to another. It's a grim thought, but entirely realistic for the period. The medieval world was a place where waste was simply part of the landscape, a natural byproduct of human existence, dealt with in the most practical, albeit often crude, ways possible. Your nose is certainly getting a workout, and you're beginning to appreciate just how much we've engineered smells out of our modern lives. Moving deeper into the rural tapestry of medieval life, you find that while the specific odors might differ from the urban centers, the intensity of smell remains a constant companion. Here, in the fields and farmsteads, it's not the concentrated rot of human waste in gutters that dominates, but rather the powerful, earthy, and often overwhelming effluvia of animals. These creatures, so vital to survival, were also prolific producers of odor, transforming the very air you breathe into a testament to their omnipresence. Livestock, from sturdy oxen pulling plows to plump pigs rooting in the mud, were everywhere. In the medieval countryside, they weren't just confined to distant pastures, they were integrated into the very fabric of daily life. Farm animals often shared barns or lean-tos directly adjacent to human dwellings. Their warmth appreciated in cold winters, their smells a given. Imagine waking up to the gentle lowing of a cow just through a thin wall, accompanied by the distinct rich aroma of its recent deposits. It was a constant, undeniable presence. The sheer volume of animal waste produced daily was staggering, and its management, or lack thereof, significantly defined the rural smells caped. The most potent and recognizable of these animal effluvia was, of course, manure. Collected from stalls and fields, it was considered a valuable commodity, essential for enriching the soil and ensuring good harvests. Farmers would spread manure over their fields, a practice that, while vital for agriculture, unleashed a powerful, pungent odor across the landscape, especially when fresh or after a rain. You'd catch the sharp, acrid scent of pig droppings mingling with the warmer, earthy smell of cow dung, perhaps even the distinct ammonia temps of horse urine from the stables. It was the smell of fertility, certainly, but also the smell of undeniable, pervasive animal waste. It reminds you that agriculture then wasn't some sanitized industrial process. It was messy, organic, and deeply aromatic. Beyond direct waste, the very presence of animals contributed to the smell. The musky, lanolin-rich scent of sheep, particularly when wet, could be quite strong. The damp, earthy smell of pigs wallowing in mud, combined with their own distinct body odor, was another common rural fragrance. And horses, with their sweaty hides and the rich, yeasty smell of their breath, added another layer to this complex bouquet. You're realizing that every animal had its own signature scent, and collectively they formed a powerful, living aroma that was inextricably linked to the medieval agricultural rhythm. It's interesting to consider that some historical texts mention people using specific herbs or practices to try and reduce the animal stench in their immediate living areas. This suggests that while tolerated, the odors were not always entirely pleasant, even to medieval noses. Perhaps they would hang bundles of strong-smelling herbs near animal pens or regularly scatter straw to absorb moisture and odors. These efforts, while rudimentary, highlight a continuous, if often losing, battle against the pervasive smell. It's like trying to air out a particularly pungent cheese shop by opening a window. You might get some fresh air, but the core aroma isn't going anywhere fast. Many historians debate whether the medieval nose simply became desensitized to these constant animal odors, or if people possessed a more refined ability to distinguish between different types of animal smells, perhaps even identifying the health of an animal by its scent. While modern studies suggest humans can adapt to strong smells over time, it's also plausible that their survival depended on being intimately aware of their surroundings, including the nuances of animal aromas. You might develop an unconscious catalogue of smells yourself, learning to differentiate the scent of a healthy cow from one that might be ailing, simply by the subtle shifts in its overall aroma. Finally, think about the insects drawn to these environments. Flies, as mentioned before, would be a constant presence, buzzing around animal droppings and then perhaps landing on your food. But also the cloying, sickly sweet smell of stagnant pools or muddy patches where insects bred, adding another layer to the damp, organic odors of the countryside. It's a reminder that every living thing, from the smallest insect to the largest ox, contributed to the rich, full-bodied aroma of medieval rural life. You're finding that your perception of natural smells is expanding, perhaps uncomfortably so, to encompass a far wider and more potent range of scents than you ever imagined. As you venture deeper into the bustling medieval township, the dominant agricultural aromas of the countryside begin to give way, or rather, blend into something far more acrid and specific. A new category of smells asserts itself, a testament to human ingenuity and the messy reality of medieval production. You are now encountering the distinct, often overwhelming, sense of medieval industry. These aren't the broad, naturalistic smells of nature, but the sharper, more chemical, often deeply unpleasant odors, generated by the burgeoning trades and crafts that kept the medieval economy churning. Tanneries, for instance, were notorious for their foul stench, often located on the outskirts of towns or downwind, precisely because their processes were so malodorous. The tanning of animal hides, essential for producing leather for shoes, belts, armor, and countless other goods, involved soaking the hides in vats of potent, putrefying concoctions. This could include stale urine, which provided ammonia, animal dung, and even dog excrement, alongside various barks and plant extracts. The smell of decaying flesh, strong chemicals, and ammonia would have hung heavy in the air around a tannery, a truly nauseating blend that clung to everything. You'd likely wrinkle your nose and hurry past, even if the goods produced were vital to daily life. It's a smell that speaks volumes about the pragmatic, no-holds-barred approach to medieval manufacturing. Another significant contributor to the industrial smellscape was the dyeing of textiles. While some natural dyes produced earthy or pleasant aromas, many involved mordants and processes that generated strong, often unpleasant, chemical smells. Think of the vats of fermenting woad used to produce blue dye, which would have had a very distinct, almost sickly sweet, yet pungent odor. Other dyes might involve stale urine as a fixer, or various mineral compounds that released strong fumes. The air around a medieval dyer's workshop would be thick with these processing smells, often staining the air with the very colors being worked on. It's a sensory experience that reminds you how much of medieval life was hands-on and raw, directly interacting with processes we now encapsulate behind factory walls. Then there were the slaughterhouses and butcher shops. In many towns, these operations were integrated directly into the urban fabric, not relegated to distant industrial zones. The smell of fresh blood, offal, and animal guts, especially on a warm day, would have been intense and pervasive around these areas. The waste products, not always efficiently disposed of, would draw flies and contribute to a thick, meaty, and ultimately decaying aroma. You might hear the squealing of pigs or the lowing of cattle, followed by the gruesome sounds of their demise, all accompanied by that heavy, coppery smell of blood. It's a visceral reminder of where your food came from. Historians often ponder how medieval peoples' continuous exposure to these intense industrial odors affected their respiratory health and overall well-being. Was there a higher tolerance, or simply a forced acceptance of these conditions? While specific medical knowledge of airborne pollutants was absent, the sheer volume of fumes and particles from various crafts must have had an impact, even if unseen. It makes you realize that survival in the medieval period wasn't just about avoiding disease or starvation, but also about enduring a constant sensory assault from your environment. Even less obvious trades contributed. The blacksmith's forge, while producing the pleasant, comforting smell of wood smoke and hot metal, also generated the sharp, sulfuric temps of burning coal or charcoal, and perhaps the acrid scent of quenched iron. The potter's kiln, firing clay, would emit intense smoke and the earthy smell of baking earth. The breweries and bakeries, while often celebrated for their yeasty, bready aromas, also contributed to a thick, fermented, sometimes sour background note, especially from the fermentation process. It was a dense layering of scents, each trade adding its unique signature to the town's overall aroma profile. You begin to understand that the industrial pollution of the Middle Ages was not the smokestack chemical spill variety of the Industrial Revolution, but rather an organic, decentralized form of pollution born directly from daily necessity and craft production. These were the smells of people working, making, and surviving, and they were woven inextricably into the very air of medieval settlements. It's a testament to human adaptability that people not only lived amidst these powerful odors, but thrived, creating vibrant communities despite the constant tangible presence of raw production. Your modern sensibilities are being thoroughly challenged, offering a new appreciation for the hidden, or rather, smelled, aspects of historical life. As you continue your olfactory journey through the medieval period, you become aware that not all strong smells were unwelcome. Indeed, some were absolutely vital, representing the difference between sustenance and starvation. You are now encountering the fascinating and often pungent world of medieval food preservation. In an era without refrigeration, the ingenious, if sometimes malodorous, methods of keeping food edible for longer periods played a crucial role, and they left a distinct, lasting impression on the ambient scent of any medieval home or larder. Salting was perhaps the most widespread and effective method of preserving meat and fish. Large quantities of salt, a precious commodity, would be rubbed into cuts of meat or layered between fish to draw out moisture and inhibit bacterial growth. The result was food that, while preserved, often carried a very strong, briny aroma. Imagine entering a medieval pantry and being met with the sharp, almost aggressive temps of cured hams or salted cod. It's a smell that speaks of long journeys, lean winters, and the sheer effort required to ensure a continuous food supply. You might even find yourself salivating, despite the overwhelming saltiness in the air. A primal response to the promise of sustenance. Another prevalent method, particularly for fish, but also for some meats, was smoking. Smoking meat or fish over smoldering wood fires imparted a rich, smoky flavor and acted as a preservative. The air around a smokehouse, or even within a home where smoking was done over the hearth, would be thick with the deep, resonant aroma of wood smoke, mingled with the savory, somewhat fatty scent of the curing product. It's a smell that, to your modern nose, might evoke images of barbecues or campfires, but in the medieval context, it was a smell of survival, of food security. You might find yourself breathing deeply, appreciating this particular aroma as a welcome contrast to some of the less pleasant scents encountered thus far. Fermentation, too, played a massive role, not just for beverages, but for food preservation. Souring milk to make cheese or yogurt, pickling vegetables in vinegar or brine, and fermenting cabbage to make sauerkraut-like dishes all produce distinct, often sharp, acidic, or yeasty smells. A cellar where cheese was aging would have a pungent, complex aroma, ranging from mildly milky to intensely sharp and ammonia-like, depending on the type and age of the cheese. These were the smells of controlled decay, of beneficial bacteria transforming perishable goods into stable, flavorful sustenance. You might find the sharpness invigorating, a testament to the transformative power of microbiology. Long before microbiology was even understood, historians often ponder whether the medieval palate and sense of smell were more accustomed to, or even preferred, the strong, sometimes pungent flavors and aromas that resulted from these preservation methods. Did a medieval person truly prefer fresh meat over salted, or was the robust, intense flavor of preserved food considered a delicacy in its own right? It's likely that necessity shaped preference, and what we might find overwhelmingly salty or smoky they found delicious and reassuring. You might have to adjust your own taste buds and olfactory expectations to truly appreciate their culinary world. Drying, particularly for fruits, vegetables, and some meats, also contributed to the ambient smells. While dried foods themselves might not emit powerful odors, the process often involved exposure to the elements, and any residual moisture or imperfect drying could lead to mold or spoilage, adding musty or slightly sweet, decaying notes to the air. Imagine strings of dried apples or fish hanging in an attic, their subtle aromas mingling with the general mustiness of an old house. Even basic storage methods, lacking modern climate control, contributed. Grains stored in sacks in granaries, while generally dry, could attract pests or develop a faint, dusty, earthy smell. Root vegetables stored in cool, damp cellars might carry the scent of the earth they came from, perhaps with a touch of dampness. These weren't necessarily unpleasant, but they were ever present, adding to the low hum of natural, organic aromas in a medieval home. So, as you walk through a medieval kitchen or pantry, you are not just seeing the methods of food preservation. You are smelling them. You are inhaling the ingenuity born of necessity, the continuous battle against spoilage, and the deep, fundamental connection between aroma and sustenance. It's a sensory experience that grounds you firmly in the realities of survival in a world before refrigerators and freezers, where every meal was a testament to careful planning and robust, often smelly, preservation techniques. Your nose is learning to differentiate between the smell of decay that brings sickness and the smell of transformation that brings life. As your journey through medieval Europe continues, the pervasive aromas that have assaulted your senses begin to reveal deeper layers, moving beyond the obvious sources of waste and industry to more intimate, personal realms. Now you're enveloped by the subtle, yet incredibly significant, smells emanating from the very fabrics that clothed medieval people. In a world where laundry day wasn't a weekly, or even monthly, affair for many, and where synthetic fibers were centuries away, clothing absorbed and radiated the essence of medieval life. The primary fabrics of medieval Europe were wool and linen. Wool, being robust and warm, was exceptionally common, especially for outer garments. However, wool is also naturally absorbent and without frequent washing. It readily retains body odors, smoke from hearths, and the general ambient smells of the environment. Imagine a thick woolen tunic worn day in and day out, perhaps brushed off occasionally but rarely thoroughly cleaned. It would develop a complex aroma, a blend of human sweat, dried mud, animal dander, and the pervasive wood smoke that permeated every home. You might catch a faint, musty scent, a bit like an old, damp blanket that hasn't seen fresh air in ages. Linen, on the other hand, made from flax, was often used for undergarments because it was smoother against the skin and could be washed more easily. Though easily is a relative term in the Middle Ages, even so, these undergarments would still absorb sweat and body oils, and without modern detergents, the cleaning process itself, often just boiling with lye or ash, might not completely eradicate all lingering scents. You'd find that even relatively clean linen still had a distinct, earthy, perhaps slightly alkaline smell from the washing process itself. It's a far cry from the artificially fragranced, soft Tazzacloud linens you're accustomed to. The lack of frequent washing meant the clothing became a kind of second skin, accumulating layers of the wearer's daily life. A peasant working in the fields would have clothes perpetually imbued with the smell of soil, manure, and sweat. A craftsman's garments would carry the specific aroma of their trade, the acrid tang of dyes, the smoky smell of a forge, or the rich scent of leather. A cook's clothing would perpetually smell of food, cooking fires, and perhaps a touch of grease. Your own clothes, after just a short time in this era, would undoubtedly begin to take on these accumulated smells, making you a true, if unintentionally, aromatic part of the medieval landscape. Consider the notion of fulling, a process used for wool to make it denser and more water-resistant. This often involved treading the wool in vats of water, clay, and sometimes even stale urine for its ammonia content to felt the fibers. While this created a durable fabric, the initial product would have a very distinct, pungent aroma that might linger for some time, even after being dried and finished. So, even the very manufacturing process imbued certain textiles with powerful, unique smells before they even reached the wearer. It's a testament to medieval pragmatism, prioritizing function over pure fragrance. It's clear that the concept of clothing contributing to personal aroma was fundamentally different. Your current garments, freshly laundered, might carry the scent of fabric softener. Their medieval counterparts were a dynamic olfactory record of their owners' activities and the environment they inhabited. These clothes were often worn for extended periods, mended repeatedly, and passed down, meaning their accumulated scent could span years, carrying the essence of previous wearers or generations. Even accessories played a part. Leather belts, pouches, and shoes, if not properly cured or maintained, could develop their own musky, animalistic odors. Furs, used for warmth, would have a distinct, often strong, wild animal scent, particularly if they got wet or were not aired frequently. It's a subtle but constant reminder that every aspect of medieval life, from the largest trade to the smallest personal item, contributed to the rich, complex olfactory world. Your nose is learning to read these subtle cues, understanding that a person's smell in the Middle Ages told a much deeper story than it does today. You might even find yourself unconsciously trying to discern someone's profession or social, standing just by the faint scent clinging to their garments. It's a skill you're picking up out of necessity, a vital part of navigating this incredibly aromatic world. The overwhelming reality of medieval odors, a constant background hum of organic decay, human activity, and animal presence, naturally led to attempts at mitigation. While full-scale sanitation was a distant dream, medieval people were far from passive victims of their environment. You're now stepping into the realm of medieval perfumery and palliation, where ingenuity and available resources were marshaled to mask, rather than eliminate, the pervasive stench. These efforts, though rudimentary by modern standards, offer a fascinating glimpse into a culture grappling with an omnipresent olfactory challenge. One of the most common and accessible methods for counteracting bad smells was the liberal use of aromatic herbs and flowers. Homes, especially those of the wealthier sort, would often have rushes strewn on the floor, mixed with sweet-smelling herbs like lavender, mint, chamomile, and sweet woodruff. As people walked across them, these herbs would be crushed, releasing their pleasant fragrances into the air. Imagine the distinct herbaceous scent mixing with the underlying mustiness of straw and whatever else had been tracked indoors. It was a simple, yet effective way to add layers of more agreeable aromas to the domestic environment. You might even find yourself instinctively crushing a few leaves under your foot, just for a moment of fragrant relief. For personal use, pomanders and nosegays were popular accessories, especially among the wealthier classes. A pomander was a ball made of fragrant substances, often a mixture of ambergris, civet, musk, and various spices like cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, sometimes mixed with wax or resin. These were carried in decorative cases, often suspended from a belt or necklace, and could be held to the nose when encountering particularly noxious odors. Nosegays, on the other hand, were small bouquets of fresh flowers and herbs, serving a similar purpose. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of carrying a mini air freshener, always at the ready. It's a clear indication that while people lived with strong smells, they weren't necessarily comfortable with them and actively sought ways to mitigate their impact. The church also played a significant role in introducing pleasing aromas. Incense, particularly frankincense and myrrh, was burned regularly in religious ceremonies. The rich, resinous smoke would fill the air of cathedrals and churches, not only serving a spiritual purpose, but also acting as a powerful counter-odor to the less holy smells of the congregation and the building itself. You'd step into a church and immediately notice the difference. A blessed respite from the street smells, a moment of olfactory purification. This sacred smoke might have been one of the few truly consistently pleasant and powerful aromas many people encountered. Many scholars debate whether these attempts at perfuming were truly effective in disguising the dominant stench, or if they simply added another layer to the complex smellscape. Did the sweet scent of a pomander truly block out the smell of an open sewer, or did it merely blend with it, creating a new, albeit perhaps more tolerable, amalgam? It's likely a bit of both. The goal wasn't to eliminate, but to overlay, to soften the harsh edges of reality with more pleasing notes. It was an olfactory battle of attrition, and sometimes the perfume won a small skirmish. Vinegar was another common palliative. Its sharp, acidic smell was believed to ward off disease based on the miasma theory and was used to clean surfaces, though its primary effect was probably more olfactory than antiseptic. You might see people wiping down tables with vinegar cloths, leaving behind its distinctive temps, a temporary clean smell. Rosewater, too, was used for washing hands and as a mild fragrance, offering a delicate floral contrast to the prevailing pungency. Even fires contributed to odor control. The constant burning of wood and peat in hearths not only provided warmth, but also acted as a natural air purifier, albeit one that replaced one smell stagnation, decay with another smoke. The smoky scent clinging to everything was, in a way, a sign of a cleaned or at least aired-out space, contrasting with the damp, unventilated mustiness that would otherwise prevail. So, when you smell wood smoke, it's not just a sign of warmth, but also of a perpetual, smoky attempt at odor management. You begin to appreciate the clever, if limited, ways medieval people tried to make their aromatic world just a little more bearable, turning to nature's own remedies to combat nature's less savory contributions. Your journey through the medieval scentscape continues, bringing you to a realm where smells take on a more ominous, often sickening, quality. You are now confronting the distinct aromas associated with disease, injury, and the rudimentary practices of medieval medicine. In an era without germ theory or modern antiseptics, the sick room, the battlefield, and the surgeon's bench were places defined not just by pain and suffering, but by a chilling, undeniable bouquet of bodily fluids, decay, and desperate, often ineffective, remedies. The smell of pus was ubiquitous in medieval medical settings. Wounds, whether from battle, accident, or disease, frequently became infected. Pus, with its thick, yellowish consistency and distinctly sweet et foul odor, was a common sight and smell. Medieval physicians, often lacking understanding of microbial infection, sometimes even considered the formation of laudable pus a sign of healing, believing it was the body expelling harmful humors. You'd catch the cloying, sickly sweet scent around anyone with an unhealed wound, a constant reminder of the fragility of health and the omnipresent threat of infection. It's a smell that would turn your modern stomach, accustomed to the antiseptic cleanliness of hospitals, beyond open wounds. Various diseases carried their own specific, often putrid olfactory signatures. The Black Death, for instance, was said to produce a particularly horrific stench, a mix of decaying flesh, bodily fluids, and perhaps the very process of the body succumbing to such a virulent infection. Chronic illnesses often led to open sores, gangrene, or severe fevers, all contributing to a sickroom atmosphere thick with the smell of sweat, waste, and decomposing tissue. Imagine entering a crowded, unventilated room where several people were gravely ill. The air would be heavy, almost palpable, with these distressing aromas. It was the smell of suffering, a powerful sensory cue for danger and impending death. Then there were the medical treatments themselves, many of which were as aromatic as they were dubious in efficacy. Bloodletting, a common practice for rebound humors, would release the metallic, coppery smell of fresh blood into the air. Poultices made from various herbs, animal parts, and even human waste were applied to wounds and sores, each contributing its own complex, often earthy or foul aroma. Cauterization, used to stop bleeding or seal wounds, would produce the terrifying smell of burning flesh, a sharp, acrid scent that would linger long after the procedure. You'd find that the remedies often added to the unpleasantness of the sickroom, a double assault on the senses. Many scholars debate how medieval medical practitioners relied on their sense of smell for diagnosis. Did they truly believe that a particular aroma emanating from a patient indicated a specific imbalance of humors, or was it a more general, intuitive assessment of the patient's condition? It's likely that a keen sense of smell was a useful, if unscientific, diagnostic tool, allowing them to detect the presence of infection or specific diseases based on their characteristic odors. Your own nose, if forced to adapt, might also start to discern subtle differences in these sickening smells. A morbid skill born of necessity. Even the materials used in rudimentary medical settings contributed. Dirty rags used for bandages, wooden splints, and primitive bedding would soak up bodily fluids and cling to odors, becoming sources of continued contamination and stench. The lack of disposable items meant that instruments and materials were reused, carrying with them the accumulated smells and unseen pathogens of previous patients. It was a vicious cycle of smell and disease, intertwined in a horrifying dance. You begin to understand that visiting the sick or tending to the injured in the Middle Ages was not just a visual or auditory experience. It was a deeply olfactory one. The air itself became a carrier of illness and despair, a constant reminder of the body's vulnerability and the harsh realities of limited medical knowledge. Your modern sensibilities, accustomed to sterile environments, and the absence of such direct, visceral smells, are profoundly challenged. You realize that a deep breath in a medieval sickroom would have been an act of bravery, or perhaps simply an unavoidable necessity. Your nose processing information that your mind desperately wants to reject. Your journey through the medieval olfactory landscape now brings you to perhaps the most chilling and inescapable scent of all, the smell of death. In an era where life was often short and precarious, death was a far more public and pervasive presence than it is in your modern world. Without embalming, advanced mortuary science, or rapid, refrigerated transport, the decomposition of the human body, with its distinct and horrifying aroma, was an undeniable reality that permeated homes, battlefields, and even everyday public spaces. The process of human decomposition, even shortly after death, produces a very specific and utterly unmistakable odor. This begins with the subtle, sweetish scent of decay as the body's cells break down, followed by the more potent, putrid smell caused by the proliferation of bacteria, releasing gases like putrescine and cadaverine. Imagine a loved one dying in their home, as was common, and the body remaining there for a day or two before burial. The air in that home would quickly fill with this heavy, cloying, yet deeply disturbing aroma, a stark reminder of the transition from life to its inevitable end. It's a smell that bypasses your conscious thought and directly assails your deepest, most primal fears. In times of widespread mortality, such as during plagues or famines, the smell of death would become truly overwhelming. During outbreaks like the Black Death, the sheer volume of corpses, often left unburied or hastily interred in mass graves, would have produced a sickening stench that permeated entire towns and regions. The air would be thick with the smell of hundreds, even thousands, of decomposing bodies, a pervasive miasma that must have been utterly psychologically traumatizing. You'd catch a whiff of it on the wind, a grim forecast of the devastation sweeping through the population. It was the smell of terror, the very air seeming to embody the despair of the age. Battlefields, too, presented a horrifying olfactory tableau. After a major conflict, the landscape would be littered not just with bodies, but with the lingering, coppery smell of blood, mingled with the earthy scent of churned soil, and quickly the sweet, putrid aroma of decaying flesh. The bodies of both humans and horses, left unburied or partially interred, would decompose rapidly, especially in warmer weather. You'd imagine the distinct buzz of flies, attracted by the stench, adding to the macabre scene. It's a sensory image that underscores the brutal reality of medieval warfare, far beyond the romanticized notions you might hold. Many scholars debate the psychological impact of living with such pervasive reminders of death. Did the constant exposure to the smell of decay desensitize medieval people, or did it foster a heightened awareness of mortality and prompt a deeper engagement with religious beliefs about the afterlife? It's likely that while a degree of desensitization occurred, the distinct horror of the smell of decay would always have been present, a visceral trigger for grief and existential dread. Your own nose, despite all the medieval smells it has encountered, finds this one particularly hard to process, a universal symbol of finality. Beyond the immediate human and animal corpses, the general lack of efficient waste disposal contributed to a background level of decomposition that subtly echoed the smell of death. Food waste, animal carcasses, even small ones like rats, and other organic refuse, slowly breaking down in streets and middens, would release similar compounds, creating a continuous low-level hum of decay that subtly reminded people of mortality, even when no fresh corpse was present. It's a cyclical reminder that everything, eventually, returns to the earth. Finally, consider the practices around burial. While attempts were made to inter the dead relatively quickly, the simple act of digging graves, especially in overcrowded churchyards, could unearth older remains, releasing the disturbed, earthy smell of ancient decomposition. The act of mourning was not just a visual or emotional one. It was deeply olfactory, inextricably linked to the chilling aroma of the departed. The medieval world did not hide death away in sterile, distant places. It lived with it, breathed it, and smelled it constantly. Your experience now has fundamentally altered your understanding of how close life and death truly were, and how powerfully the sense of smell underscored that proximity. As the chilling scent of mortality begins to recede from your immediate senses, a new, more ethereal aroma starts to permeate the air. You're now being drawn towards a towering stone edifice, its ancient walls exuding a cold, damp, yet strangely inviting presence. From within, through arched doorways and stained glass windows, a rich, resinous smoke billows forth, carrying a scent unlike any you've encountered so far in this medieval world. This is the aroma of faith, of ritual, of deliberate spiritual cleansing designed to elevate the senses and, perhaps, to offer a fragrant antidote to the otherwise overwhelming realities of daily life. One pervasive mainstream historical reality is the significant role of incense in medieval Christian worship. Frankincense and myrrh, imported at great expense from distant lands, were burned in thuribles, those swinging metal censers, during mass, processions, and other sacred rites. The thick, fragrant smoke would fill the vast naves of cathedrals, and the smaller chapels alike, clinging to the stone, the vestments, and the very air. This wasn't just for show. It held deep symbolic meaning, representing the prayers of the faithful ascending to heaven and the presence of the divine. But beyond the spiritual, there was an undeniable practical application. This powerful, sweet, and often spicy aroma was a formidable counterpoint to the less holy smells of a congregation packed into an unventilated space, with all the accompanying human and environmental odors that you've become intimately familiar with. Stepping inside, you find the air a palpable cloud of this sacred perfume. It's a remarkable contrast to the open sewers and animal effluvia outside. You might even feel a sense of immediate relief, a cleansing breath in a world otherwise defined by less pleasant atmospheric qualities. It's almost as if the very air inside the church is a different substance, purified by centuries of prayer and ritualized smoke. You wonder if this was perhaps the only truly consistently pleasant and reliably potent aroma many medieval people regularly experienced. It was certainly more dependable than hoping your neighbor had bathed recently. A rather intriguing tidbit about this aromatic practice is that some medieval households of means would even attempt to replicate the church's purifying scent in their own homes by burning small amounts of precious incense or by hanging sachets of dried herbs that mimicked similar spiritual aromas. This was, of course, a luxury, as frankincense and myrrh were incredibly expensive, but it shows a desire to bring that sense of ritualistic cleanliness and sacred perfume into their personal spaces, perhaps as a way to ward off both perceived evil and actual stench. Imagine having just endured a particularly pungent day in the marketplace, and then returning home to a faint, comforting whiff of something akin to a mini cathedral. It might just be enough to restore your spirits, if not your nasal passages entirely. The academic community still debates the precise balance between the theological symbolism of incense and its more pragmatic function as an odor suppressor. Was the primary intention purely spiritual, with the masking effect an accidental, though welcome, side benefit? Or did the very real need to make crowded medieval churches more bearable contribute significantly to the enduring prevalence of incense use in ritual? It's a fascinating question, suggesting that even piety might have had a pragmatic, nasal component. After all, it's hard to focus on divine transcendence when your immediate sensory experience is one of overwhelming human reality. Beyond the formal rituals, the general cleanliness of the church itself, while not always meeting modern standards, was often prioritized more than other public spaces. Monks and priests might sweep floors, and perhaps even wash down certain areas, contributing to a slightly cleaner base odor compared to the street outside. But even here, the underlying smells of damp stone, aging timber, and perhaps the occasional rodent or pigeon would provide a subtle counterpoint to the powerful incense. It's a reminder that even the most sacred spaces were not entirely immune to the pervasive realities of the medieval world. You might notice that the particular combination of frankincense and myrrh, though strong, never quite becomes cloying, like some of the more synthetic fragrances of your own time. There's an earthiness, a warmth to it that feels ancient and organic. It clings to your clothes, to your hair, and you carry a piece of that sacred aroma with you as you exit the church and re-enter the bustling, unperfumed street. For a fleeting moment, you might even think you smell a faint trace of holiness, clinging to the air around you, a stark contrast to the familiar urban bouquet. It's a reminder that even in an age of overwhelming odors, there were deliberate attempts to craft spaces and moments of aromatic sanctuary, providing a much-needed respite for the medieval nose and soul. Your senses, constantly assailed, are given a moment of unexpected, almost divine, reprieve. Your journey through the medieval sensory landscape leads you inevitably to the very source of life itself, water. And just like everything else in this period, the water you encounter, from stagnant ponds to flowing rivers and the very wells people drew from, carries its own distinct and often unsettling odors. Without modern filtration, chemical treatment, or enclosed piping systems, medieval water sources were intimately connected to their surroundings, reflecting every biological and environmental influence, creating an olfactory signature far removed from the clean, neutral scent you associate with drinking water. Most medieval communities relied on local water sources, primarily rivers, streams, and wells. These sources were often shared with livestock, used for washing clothes, and perhaps, most disturbingly, served as convenient receptacles for waste disposal. Imagine a river flowing through a town. Upstream, it might be relatively fresh, carrying the earthy smell of the countryside. But as it passes through the urban center, it becomes a literal open sewer, accumulating human and animal waste, industrial effluent from tanneries and dye works, and general refuse. The water would develop a thick, putrid, and often nauseating smell, a cocktail of decay and pollution. You'd certainly think twice about drawing your drinking water from such a source. And yet, for many, it was the only option. Wells, while often seen as purer sources, were not immune to contamination. Shallow wells could be easily polluted by runoff from streets, overflowing cesspits, or nearby middens. The water drawn from such wells might carry a faint, earthy, or even sulfurous smell, indicative of organic matter decaying underground or mineral impurities. Deeper wells might offer better quality, but even they were vulnerable to long-term seepage. You might catch a whiff of metallic temps, or a distinct mustiness, that would immediately set off alarms for your modern sensibilities. For a medieval person, however, this might just be the normal smell of their local well water. The simple act of drawing water could be an olfactory experience in itself. The buckets and ropes, often made of organic materials, would absorb the smells of the water and the environment, contributing to the overall impression. The water itself, once brought into the home, would continue to release its volatile compounds, subtly infusing the domestic space with its particular aroma. It's a constant low-level reminder that every sip of water was a gamble, not just for taste, but for health. It's compelling to consider that while medieval people didn't understand germ theory, they certainly recognized when water smelled bad and was associated with sickness. They often preferred living water from springs or fast-flowing rivers, instinctively perhaps, recognizing its relative freshness. They also knew that boiling water made it safer, which is why brewing ale or beer, which involved boiling the water, became such a prevalent and safer alternative to drinking raw water. So, while they might not have pinpointed the cause, their noses and their survival instincts often led them to pragmatic, if not scientifically understood, solutions. This keen observation highlights their resilience in adapting to a challenging environment. Stagnant water found in ditches, ponds, and forgotten puddles presented an even more potent olfactory challenge. These still bodies of water, warmed by the sun, became breeding grounds for algae and bacteria, producing a distinct, often sickly sweet, marshy or sulfurous smell. These were the prime locations for insect breeding, adding to the overall unsanitary conditions. You'd find yourself unconsciously avoiding these areas, not just to prevent muddying your shoes, but to escape the suffocating stench rising from them. The medieval appreciation for fresh, clean water, when it could be found, was likely profound. The crisp, clean scent of a mountain spring or a fast-flowing, unpolluted stream would have been a rare and cherished luxury, a stark contrast to the everyday reality. The very concept of fresh water for them was not just about taste, but about an absence of offensive odors, a true sensory delight. Your current tap water, odorless and clear, would be an unimaginable marvel of cleanliness and neutrality to a medieval nose. You're realizing that even something as fundamental as thirst, quenched differently, leaving behind a subtle, yet deeply impactful, aromatic signature on the medieval world. Your journey through the medieval soundscape now takes you indoors, into the very structures that sheltered medieval life. Here, the broad open-air aromas of the city and countryside yield to more contained, intimate smells shaped by the materials used to construct these dwellings. The walls, floors, and roofs of medieval homes were not merely inert barriers against the elements. They were living elements, breathing in and out the very essence of their inhabitants' lives, accumulating and radiating a distinct aroma that defined the domestic space. The primary building materials for most medieval homes were timber, wattle, and daub, stone, and thatch. Timber frames, often unseasoned or minimally treated, would emit a rich, earthy, resinous scent when new, gradually mellowing into a more subdued, woody aroma over time. But wood is also porous and absorbent. It would soak up the omnipresent wood smoke from the hearth, the lingering scent of cooking, and the general humidity of human breath and activity. Over years, these wooden structures would develop a deep, ingrained smell, a blend of smoke, stale air, and perhaps a faint, sweet mustiness from dampness. You might even detect the ghostly scent of past meals or fires. A silent record of generations lived within those walls. Wattle and daub, a common infill for timber frames, made from woven branches plastered with a mixture of clay, sand, straw, and sometimes animal dung, also contributed. while the dung would lose its strong odor as it dried. The earthy smell of clay and straw would remain, providing a grounding, natural background note. This raw, organic composition meant that the walls themselves felt alive, emanating a subtle, loamy fragrance, especially on damp days when the moisture released the scent of the earth. It was a constant reminder of the building's natural origins, a stark contrast to the sterile plasterboard of your modern homes. Roofs, especially those made of thatch, were another significant source of domestic aroma. Thatch, typically made from reeds or straw, would absorb rainwater, heat from the sun, and smoke from the hearth below. When wet, it could emit a strong, grassy, decaying smell, particularly if it was old or poorly maintained. In dry weather, it would simply smell of dry straw, perhaps with a faint hint of wood smoke escaping through the interstices. The very ceiling above you would be breathing out these natural, organic smells. A living canopy over your head, the floors, often compacted, earth or simply rushes strewn over packed dirt, were perhaps the most immediate and dynamic source of indoor smells. These rushes, as mentioned previously, were regularly replenished, sometimes mixed with herbs to add pleasant notes. But underneath, the bare earth floor would hold the accumulated smells of tracked-in mud, spilled food, and whatever else had fallen onto it. It would often be damp, contributing a persistent, earthy, musty smell, especially in areas with poor drainage. You'd find that even indoors, your shoes would quickly become caked with a distinct, loamy scent of the medieval ground. There's a fascinating question that arises. How much did the inherent smells of these natural building materials contribute to the home smell that medieval people recognized and found comforting? Was the smoky, earthy, slightly damp aroma of their dwelling a fundamental part of what home meant to them? Something they would instinctively seek out after being exposed to the harsh smells of the outside world. It's likely that this complex blend of natural and man-made odors created a unique olfactory signature for each house, a deeply ingrained sensory memory for its occupants. Even the simple act of lighting a fire added to the interior atmosphere. The smell of burning wood or peat, while providing warmth and light, would fill the room, coating surfaces and lingering long after the fire died down. This constant presence of smoke wasn't just visual, it was deeply olfactory, a defining feature of medieval interior spaces. So, when you think of a cozy medieval hearth, remember that cozy came with a perpetual smoky undertone. You realize that a medieval home was a highly permeable structure, constantly interacting with its environment, both absorbing and emitting odors. It was a space saturated with the smells of daily life, cooking, sleeping, working, and the simple fact of human and animal presence. Your nose, now finely tuned to the subtleties of medieval aromas, begins to recognize these indoor fragrances as a distinct category, a unique blend of organic materials and human activity that collectively defined the very essence of medieval domesticity. It's a profound realization that the air inside their homes was far from inert. It was a living, breathing component of their existence. Now, as you continue to experience the medieval world through your nose, you begin to perceive a grander rhythm at play, one that subtly, yet profoundly, reshaped the entire olfactory landscape throughout the year. The smells you've encountered are not static, they ebb and flow, strengthen and diminish, transforming with the changing seasons. The very air you breathe takes on different characteristics, depending on whether it's the crisp chill of winter, the blossoming warmth of spring, the dusty heat of summer, or the damp decay of autumn, the natural cycles of agriculture and weather, had a profound and direct impact on the prevailing smells. In spring, as the ground thawed and new life emerged, you'd detect the fresh, almost sweet scent of burgeoning growth, newly sprouted grass, budding trees, and the damp, earthy aroma of soil awakening after winter's sleep. This would be, mingled with the faint, lingering smell of last year's decomposition, now re-energized by the returning warmth, perhaps a slightly richer, almost fermented note from thawing manure. It's a period of renewal, and your nose, accustomed to the muted smells of winter, would likely find this burst of natural fragrance invigorating. Summer brought a dramatically different set of aromas. The heat intensified existing odors, causing organic matter to decompose more rapidly and volatile compounds to evaporate more readily. The ubiquitous smell of animal waste in fields and streets would become far more pungent, almost suffocating on still, hot days. Dust, churned up by countless feet and hooves on unpaved roads, would add a dry, earthy, almost choking quality to the air. Yet, summer also brought the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers, the comforting aroma of hay being cut and drying in the sun, and the robust smell of ripening crops. You'd find yourself experiencing extreme moments of surprising sweetness punctuated by blasts of intense putrefaction, a veritable olfactory roll. It's a reminder that even the loveliest scents are often fleeting. When autumn arrived, the smellscape shifted again, taking on a deeper, more melancholic tone. The dominant aromas would be the rich, damp scent of fallen leaves decaying on the ground, releasing their earthy, fungal notes. The air would grow crisp with the increasing presence of wood smoke as hearths were lit more regularly for warmth, creating a pervasive, comforting, yet often acrid haze. The smells of the harvest-ripe fruits, drying grains, and the fermenting temps of cider or wine production would also fill the air, creating a complex blend of sweetness, decay, and smoky warmth. You'd likely feel a chill in the air and a corresponding change in the way scents lingered, clinging more heavily. And then winter. The cold air, while suppressing some odors by slowing decomposition, would amplify others. The smell of wood smoke would become the single most dominant and comforting aroma, a constant sign of life and warmth. The sharp, clean scent of frost on the air would bring a certain crispness, temporarily purifying some of the lingering staleness. However, with reduced ventilation indoors and animals often brought into closer proximity for warmth, the smells of enclosed spaces, stale air, unwashed bodies, animal breath could become more concentrated and intense. It's a fascinating inversion where the outside might be cleaner, but the inside becomes a crucible of accumulated smells. A peculiar observation from the period is that certain seasonal events or tasks would generate their own intense, short-lived aromatic peaks. Think of the annual slaughtering of animals in autumn before winter set in, filling villages with the powerful, coppery smell of blood and the rich aroma of rendering fat. Or the brewing of large quantities of ale and beer in spring, releasing pervasive, yeasty, fermented odors across entire neighborhoods. These bursts of intense, transient smells would mark the passage of the year just as much as the visible changes in the landscape. It was like a medieval aromatherapy calendar, if you can call it that. The precise influence of climatic variations on medieval sensory perception is still a subject of academic discussion. Did warmer, wetter years lead to more intense and perhaps more widespread disease due to accelerated decomposition and pest breeding? Conversely, did particularly harsh winters offer a cleaner, though colder, olfactory experience. It's clear that the rhythm of the seasons directly dictated the intensity and type of smells that medieval people encountered daily, making their lives a continuous, dynamic sensory experience, far removed from the climate-controlled constancy of your own existence. You're beginning to understand that to truly grasp the medieval world, you must not only smell it, but you must smell it through all its yearly transformations. As you continue your immersive journey through medieval Europe, the world expands beyond fixed settlements, and you realize that the olfactory experience was not confined to homes or city streets. Traveling, whether for trade, pilgrimage, or war, exposed medieval individuals to a constantly shifting panorama of smells, a grand, open-air blend of everything encountered along the way. Public spaces, too, whether bustling marketplaces or solemn gathering grounds, concentrated these aromas, creating distinct, often overwhelming, sensory environments. Roads and pathways were rarely paved, meaning they were perpetually muddy or dusty, depending on the weather. The smell of damp, churned earth after a rain, mixed with the pervasive scent of horse and ox droppings, was the baseline aroma of medieval travel. Imagine the squelch of your boots as you trudge through thick mud, each step releasing a puff of earthy, animalistic odor. In dry spells, the dust kicked up by countless feet, hooves, and cartwheels would carry the dry, parched scent of desiccated earth, perhaps irritating your nose and throat with its fine particles. This wasn't a quick car journey. It was a slow, deliberate movement through a living, smelling landscape. Along these routes, you'd encounter a variety of temporary and permanent structures, each contributing its own olfactory signature. Inns, offering respite to travelers, would have a complex, layered smell: stale ale, cooking fires, unwashed bodies, perhaps the faint, sweet tens of vomit from an overindulged guest, and the ever-present scent of straw from bedding. Stables attached to inns would add the strong, clean ammonia smell of horse urine and the warm, earthy aroma of their droppings and hay. You might be offered a bed, and while grateful, your nose would immediately register the accumulated smells of countless previous occupants embedded in the straw mattress. Public gathering places, such as market squares or fairgrounds, were sensory overload zones. The air would be thick with a cacophony of smells, a concentrated version of the medieval city. Here, you'd find the pungent aroma of unwashed crowds, mingling with the diverse sense of goods being sold, the earthy smell of fresh produce, the sharp tents of curing cheese, the musky scent of raw wool, the sweet aroma of baking bread, and the rich, fatty smell of cooking meat from street vendors. This dense layering of food, body odor, and general commotion created a unique, vibrant, yet often overwhelming olfactory experience. It's a place where every step introduces a new, intense smell, sometimes clashing violently with its neighbors. It's fascinating to consider whether medieval travelers developed a heightened sense of smell as a survival mechanism, enabling them to detect the proximity of certain settlements, the health of livestock, or even the freshness of food being offered for sale. Could a seasoned merchant tell which village they were approaching just by the distinctive blend of its smells carried on the wind? It's plausible that their constant exposure trained their noses to be incredibly discerning, picking up subtle cues that your modern, desensitized nose would completely miss. Even places of worship, encountered along pilgrimage routes, while offering the spiritual scent of incense, would also bear the collective, ingrained aroma of countless pilgrims who had passed through a blend of sweat, travel dust, and perhaps the faint lingering scent of the natural herbs and ointments people might have carried, you'd realize that even sanctity wasn't entirely odorless. Finally, think about the very animals used for transport. The horses, donkeys, and oxen pulling carts or carrying riders would sweat, particularly on long journeys, emitting a strong, musky animal odor. Their tack, leather saddles, and harnesses, if not properly cared for, could develop its own distinct, somewhat acrid and oily smell. So, even the means of travel contributed directly to the smell of the journey itself. You are realizing that in the medieval world, travel was an all-encompassing sensory event, where your nose was as crucial a guide as your eyes, constantly processing a dynamic and ever-changing aromatic map of the landscape. Having traversed the broader canvases of seasonal and travel-related smells, your nose now begins to discern more specific, human-made aromas. Scents that spoke volumes about a person's craft and their place in the intricate tapestry of medieval society. You are entering the realm of the guilds and specific professions, where the very air of a workshop, a stall, or even an individual carried a signature scent born of their trade. These weren't just background notes. They were defining characteristics, often concentrated in particular streets or districts, turning entire neighborhoods into distinct olfactory zones. A well-established mainstream historical practice was the guild system, which often led to the concentration of specific trades in certain areas of a town. This meant that a street of tanners, for example, would have an utterly overwhelming and unmistakable odorous-sharp, acrid blend of decaying animal hides, urine, and potent chemicals used in the tanning process. Walking down Tanner's Lane was not a casual stroll. It was a bracing, eye-watering assault on the senses, a smell that clung to your clothes and hair long after you'd left. Similarly, the fishmongers' stalls, often near the waterfront, would perpetually reek of stale fish, brine, and the general decomposition of unsold or discarded catches, a truly potent reminder of their perishable wares. It's a smell that might make you question your desire for fresh seafood. Contrast that with the relatively pleasant, comforting aromas emanating from a baker's quarter. Here, the air would be thick with the yeasty scent of fermenting dough, the warm, toasty smell of baking bread, and the sweet, almost caramelized aroma of burnt sugar or roasting grain. You might even catch the comforting, earthy smell of wood smoke from the large ovens. This was a scent of sustenance, of warmth, of life, itself a welcome respite from some of the more challenging industrial odors. It's almost enough to make you forget the neighboring street of fullers, who processed wool using a rather smelly combination of stale urine and various earths. A more subtle, yet surprisingly widespread occupational scent came from the or candle makers, while wealthy households might afford beeswax candles, which had a delicate, honey-like aroma when burned. Most common folk relied on tallow candles made from animal fat. The process of rendering this fat, especially in bulk, created a heavy, greasy, somewhat cloying smell that would permeate the chandler's workshop and the surrounding area. When these candles burned, they would also emit a more pronounced, often smoky, animalistic odor compared to their beeswax counterparts. It's a smell that speaks to the basic necessity of light in a pre-electric age, even if it wasn't the most appealing aroma. Contemporary historians often consider the degree to which these occupational scents influenced social stratification or identity. Could you literally smell someone's profession? Was the scent of a tanner's trade a mark of their livelihood, accepted by their community, or was it a source of social stigma, causing others to keep their distance. It's likely a blend. While people understood the necessity of these pungent trades, they probably didn't invite a tanner to their dinner party without a rather significant airing out period first. Your own modern nose would certainly categorize someone who consistently smelled of fish guts or rendered fat differently than someone who smelled faintly of lavender. Consider, too, the specialized smells of apothecaries, who dealt in herbs, spices, and often more volatile chemicals for medicines and pigments. Their shops would have a complex, often sharp, medicinal aroma, mingling pungent herbs like rue and wormwood with the sweet scents of resins and spices, or the less obvious smell of a scribe's workshop with the faint yet distinct aroma of parchment made from animal skins and the earthy, sometimes metallic, smell of various inks. Even the simple act of brewing ale or beer created a pervasive, yeasty, fermented smell that hung over entire sections of towns where breweries operated. You're realizing that medieval life was a constant exercise in olfactory identification. You wouldn't just see a person or a building, you'd smell them. The air was a living encyclopedia of trades. Each sent a chapter describing the work being done, the materials being transformed, and the very identity of the people performing it. It's a sensory experience that tells a story far richer than mere sight, a testament to how intricately intertwined work, life, and smell truly were in the medieval world. Your nose, by now, is a finely tuned instrument capable of distinguishing the subtle aromatic differences that defined medieval labor. Having navigated the distinct odors of medieval trades, you now ascend the social ladder, venturing into the supposed bastions of medieval refinement and wealth, the royal courts and noble castles. You might instinctively expect an immediate respite from the pervasive, earthy, and often pungent aromas of common life, imagining halls scented with rosewater and exotic spices. And while wealth certainly afforded more opportunities for masking unpleasant smells, the reality, as your nose will quickly tell you, was far more complex and, frankly, still quite aromatic. A defining mainstream historical characteristic is that even the grandest medieval castles and noble residences, despite their opulence, faced significant challenges with basic sanitation. Waste disposal remained a rudimentary affair. Garderobes, those rudimentary latrines, often emptied directly into a moat or a ditch just outside the castle walls. While providing some distance from the living quarters, these ditches would become incredibly foul-smelling, especially on warm, still days, emitting a pervasive stench that could easily waft back into the castle, reminding everyone that even royalty couldn't escape the laws of gravity and decomposition. The grand halls might have been adorned with tapestries, but the underlying plumbing was, shall we say, a work in progress within the castle walls. The sheer density of people, lords, ladies, knights, servants, retainers, combined with animals, like dogs, often hunting hounds, with their own distinct scent, and even falcons, created a complex layering of smells. Banquets, with vast quantities of food, some of it exotic, often led to significant food waste that wasn't always swiftly removed, attracting pests and contributing to a stale, rich, and ultimately decaying aroma. Imagine the lingering scent of a roasted boar, combined with spilled ale and the general aftermath of a feast, left to sit overnight. It was a less raw smell than the common streets, perhaps, but certainly not pristine. A fascinating, rather quirky practice in noble households was the extensive use of fragrant rushes and herbs, strewn liberally across floors, particularly in dining halls and bedchambers. These would be refreshed somewhat regularly, and as people walked upon them, the herbs lavender, mint, sweet woodruff, chamomile, and others would release their pleasant aromas. This was a continuous, active effort to layer agreeable scents over the underlying castle smells of damp stone, lingering food odors, and human presence. Sometimes, costly aromatic woods would be burned in braziers, releasing sophisticated smoke to purify the air. It was less about true cleanliness and more about creating an illusion of freshness, an early form of luxury air freshener. Modern interpretations often grapple with the degree to which these efforts truly insulated the elite from the pervasive odors of their time. Did their imported perfumes and fragrant rushes genuinely overpower the underlying smells of an unhygienic castle? Or did they simply create a new, perhaps more complex, layering of strong aromas? It's likely that while their personal spaces might have smelled better than the common street, they were still far from the sterile, scent-neutral environments of modern luxury. You might find yourself inhaling a cloud of expensive civet perfume only to catch a strong whiff of stale bread and dog fur underneath. It's a bit like putting a fancy hat on a rather smelly pig. It's still a pig, just a more elegantly scented one. Beyond domestic settings, the royal retinue itself, when traveling, carried its own distinct scent. While nobles might have had more opportunities for rudimentary washing and cleaner clothes, the sheer act of constant travel, riding horses, and staying in various inns meant they were exposed to absorbed the general smells of the road. Their personal perfumes, often potent and rich with musk or ambergris, would serve as a declaration of status as much as an attempt at personal freshness. A kind of walking aromatic billboard. You realize that for the nobility, the concept of a good smell wasn't just about pleasantness. It was about demonstrating wealth and status. The ability to acquire and use expensive imported perfumes, exotic spices, and fresh herbs was a clear marker of distinction from the common folk, who relied on more basic, earthy aromas. So, while their noses might still have been assaulted by underlying castle smells, their deliberate application of potent fragrances created an olfactory bubble of perceived superiority. It's a subtle yet powerful lesson in how scent, even in a smelly world, could be a tool of social hierarchy. Your own nose has now experienced the subtle differences between pervasive stench and pervasive, expensive perfumed stench. After contemplating the grand, societal layers of medieval smell, your attention now narrows to something far more intimate, something that would define the very closest human interactions, the smell of medieval breath. Without the benefit of modern dentistry, fluoride, or daily brushing rituals, the state of oral hygiene in this period was, shall we say, a profound contributor to the personal smellscape. When you leaned in to speak to someone, or they to you, their breath would tell a story. And it wasn't always a pleasant one. A widespread mainstream historical reality is the fundamental lack of modern dental care in the Middle Ages. Tooth decay, gum disease, and tooth loss were rampant, especially as diets evolved and included more abrasive grains, or later, limited access to refined sugars for the wealthier. While medieval people didn't consume the vast quantities of sugar we do today, their diet often consisted of coarse grains, hard bread, and unwashed vegetables, which could lead to wear and tear, and particles getting lodged. Toothaches were a common affliction, and the solutions were typically extraction, or perhaps crude poultices. This meant the mouths were often host to decaying food particles, infected gums, and rotting teeth, all of which are excellent incubators for pungent breath. You can almost feel the warm, stale air washing over you as someone leans in for a whispered conversation. The prevailing smell of medieval breath would likely have been a complex mix. Imagine the lingering scent of last night's stew, perhaps, heavy with onions or garlic, mingling with the sourness of fermented drink. Add to that the pervasive, slightly sulfurous tang of decaying food trapped between teeth or beneath inflamed gums. It wasn't just a fleeting bad smell. It was an ingrained, systemic aroma that was simply part of human closeness. Social interactions, which often involved very tight personal spaces, in crowded homes or marketplaces, meant that you were in constant, undeniable proximity to these realities. There was no polite stepping back to avoid a whiff. This was simply the air between people. A curious tidbit reveals that medieval people were certainly aware of bad breath and sought remedies, albeit rudimentary ones. Texts from the period suggest chewing on fresh herbs like parsley, mint, or fennel seeds to sweeten the breath. Some even recommended more peculiar concoctions, like rinsing the mouth with strong wine or rubbing the teeth with abrasive mixtures. That might include ground charcoal or even pulverized bone. While some of these might offer temporary aromatic relief, they did little for the underlying dental health issues. You can picture someone discreetly popping a few fennel seeds into their mouth before approaching a lord or lady, hoping for a fleeting improvement. It's the medieval equivalent of trying to hide a massive plumbing leak with a fancy air. Freshener. Academic inquiry still explores the true extent to which dental pain impacted daily medieval life and productivity. While bad breath was a given, chronic toothaches would have been debilitating, affecting eating, speaking, and overall well-being. Did this constant discomfort shape their facial expressions, their very interactions? It's a testament to their resilience that they managed to function with such pervasive discomfort and its aromatic byproducts beyond decay. Poor digestion, common illnesses, and even fasting periods could also contribute to breath odor. A person suffering from certain ailments might have a breath that smelled particularly sickly or distinct, perhaps a warning sign of their condition. The intimate nature of medieval healthcare, as we've discussed, meant that a physician's nose might have been one of their primary diagnostic tools. So, when you consider social gatherings, courtly conversations, or even simple family meals, you must factor in this pervasive, intimate, olfactory component. The sweet words of a troubadour or the stern pronouncements of a king would have been delivered on a breath that carried the unfiltered essence of their internal landscape. It's a stark contrast to your modern world, where billions are spent annually on toothpaste, mouthwash, and dental floss, all designed to eradicate every trace of such natural human aromas. You realize that personal space, as a concept related to smell, was almost non-existent in medieval times. Your nose has now experienced the most personal and unavoidable of medieval smells, giving you a new appreciation for the quiet, scent-free confidence of a truly fresh breath. Having considered the intimate aromas of personal breath, your nose is now forced to confront a far more terrifying and pervasive category of medieval smell, that of widespread pestilence and disease. In an era when devastating outbreaks swept across continents, the air itself became a terrifying harbinger, thick with the unmistakable stench of mass sickness and mortality. This wasn't just an unpleasant odor. It was the chilling smell of an invisible enemy, spreading fear and despair with every breath you took. A defining mainstream historical fact is that, Medieval people fundamentally believed in the miasma theory of disease. They thought that illnesses, especially terrifying ones like the plague, were caused by bad air, noxious fumes, or miasmas arising from decaying organic matter, stagnant water, and general filth. While we now understand that germs, not smells, cause disease, this belief meant that the most terrifying illnesses were intrinsically linked to a horrifying olfactory experience. Imagine the Black Death sweeping through a town, bodies accumulating in homes and streets, often left unburied due to the sheer number of dead or the fear of contagion. The resulting smell would have been an unimaginable cocktail of putrefaction, a sickeningly sweet, cloying aroma of decaying human flesh, mingled with the sharp tang of bodily fluids, sweat, and the pungent odor of gangrenous limbs. It was the smell of collective doom, a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair. Picture yourself walking through a street where every other house harbored a dying or dead plague victim. The air itself would feel heavy, oppressive, saturated with this terrifying essence. It wasn't merely unpleasant, it was a psychological weapon, confirming the presence of the unseen killer. You might find yourself constantly gagging, your stomach churning, your mind racing to find any way to escape this omnipresent, ghastly perfume. It's a smell that would haunt your nightmares for weeks, possibly months, a visceral scar on your memory. A rather grim, yet fascinating detail of this period concerns the lengths to which people went to combat these perceived plague doctors, with their iconic bird-like masks, often stuffed the long beaks with strong-smelling aromatic substances like herbs, spices, and even civet or ambergris. They believed that by breathing through these perfumed filters, they could purify the air before it entered their lungs, thus protecting themselves from the deadly miasma. Similarly, citizens might carry pomanders or nosegays, or burn aromatic woods, tar, or incense in the streets and homes, hoping the strong, pleasant fumes would cleanse the air. It's almost comically futile, isn't it? Trying to fight a microscopic enemy with an air freshener. Contemporary research continues to assess the psychological toll of prolonged exposure to these pervasive disease-related odors. Beyond the physical symptoms of the plague, how did the constant smell of death and decay, combined with the belief that this smell was the disease, affect the mental well-being of survivors? It's likely that the trauma was deeply ingrained through all senses, with smell perhaps being the most insidious, a constant reminder of loss and terror. Your own experience with just imagining these smells is enough to give you a headache. Imagine living in them for months on end. Even less catastrophic diseases contributed their part. Fevers brought the smell of sweat and sickness. Dysentery produced its own particular putrid stench, and skin conditions, left untreated, could develop foul odors from infection. The medieval sickroom, as we touched on previously, was a microcosm of these larger pestilential odors, a concentrated reminder of the body's vulnerability and its unpleasant byproducts when ill. You realize that in medieval Europe, the smell of pestilence was not a distant concept communicated through statistics. It was a palpable, terrifying reality that permeated the very air you breathed. It forced people into desperate, often ineffective, actions to protect themselves. This era reminds you that while we thankfully understand disease transmission differently now, the human instinct to recoil from foul, sickening odors, the very symptoms of disease, remains deeply ingrained. Your nose, by now, is a seasoned veteran of medieval smells, but this particular category leaves a chilling, indelible impression, a testament to humanity's resilience in the face of such an invisible yet powerfully scented threat. Having recoiled from the overwhelming and terrifying sense of pestilence, your senses now turn to the attempts, however rudimentary, to combat the general filth that contributed to so many of those pervasive odors. You are now exploring the limited, often labor-intensive, and sometimes frankly unpleasant, methods and products medieval people used to try and keep themselves, their clothes, and their immediate surroundings less aromatic. It's well documented that the medieval cleaning arsenal was far simpler and less effective than your modern array of detergents, disinfectants, and automated appliances. For personal washing and laundry, lye soap was a primary agent. This harsh, alkaline substance was typically made by boiling animal fats with lye derived from wood ash. It was certainly effective at cutting through grease and dirt, but it was incredibly abrasive, likely harsh on skin and fabric, and certainly didn't leave a fresh linen scent. Imagine the feel of it, a coarse, yellowish bar that might leave your hands feeling raw and your clothes stiff. The smell of this soap itself would be strong and acrid, almost burning temps that was more about raw chemical power than delicate fragrance. For scrubbing surfaces or removing tougher stains, people often relied on sheer physical effort, using stiff brushes made from natural fibers and abrasive materials like sand or rough cloths. Floors, if not covered in rushes, would be scrubbed with water, often scooped from local, already murky sources, meaning you were often cleaning with slightly dirty water to begin with. The concept of sanitization, of killing unseen germs, was entirely absent. Clean largely meant visually free of obvious dirt and less obviously smelly. It was a constant, exhausting battle against pervasive grime, often with limited success. You might watch someone scrub a wooden table for what seems like an hour, only for a faint, lingering greasiness to remain. A rather peculiar historical detail highlights the sheer pragmatism of medieval cleaning, the use of stale urine for washing wool. As we touched on when discussing fulling, the ammonia in aged urine was a powerful degreaser, excellent for cleaning raw wool and preparing it for weaving. So, while undoubtedly effective, the initial washing process involved soaking wool in vats of human waste, a truly pungent undertaking. While the finished product would be rinsed, the very notion of cleaning clothes, by essentially soaking them in aged bodily fluids, is a stark contrast to your modern laundry room filled with fabric softeners and brightly scented pods. You might wonder if a faint, almost imperceptible temps of ammonia ever truly left the wool. Even after being woven into a fine tunic, discussions persist among historians regarding the efficacy of medieval cleaning methods in controlling odors versus merely moving filth around. Did the vigorous scrubbing and liberal use of lye truly eliminate the source of bad smells, or did they simply dilute them, push them elsewhere, or layer them with new, different strong smells? It's likely that while some visible dirt was removed, many of the underlying causes of medieval odors, decaying organic matter, stagnant moisture, lack of proper ventilation, remained stubbornly in place. It's like sweeping dirt under a rug and then hoping no one notices the mound. Even personal cleaning, as mentioned before, was basic. People might rinse their mouths with water or wine, rub their teeth with cloths or specific herbs, but there were no toothbrushes as you know them, no floss, and certainly no toothpaste. Body washing was often a quick sponge bath, or a full bath every few weeks or months, depending on resources. Clothes were washed infrequently, and often only the outer layer might get a superficial cleaning. Undergarments might see more regular washing, but even then, the techniques were rudimentary. So, when you consider the clean medieval person or household, you must recalibrate your expectations. Their version of clean was a functional one, aimed at removing visible grime and perhaps the most offensive odors, rather than achieving a sterile environment. The smell associated with these efforts was one of raw labor, harsh cleansers, and the persistent dampness of unyielding filth. Your modern nose, accustomed to the fresh, almost sterile scent of bleached surfaces and artificially fragranced fabrics, would find medieval clean a rather complicated and still distinctly smelly concept. You realize that true cleanliness, as you understand it, is a relatively recent invention, born of scientific understanding and industrial innovation. After exploring the limitations of medieval cleaning methods, it's time to address a persistent, almost universally held misconception about medieval people: the myth of the great unwashed. Popular culture often paints a picture of an entire continent living in perpetual filth, never bathing and wallowing in their own grime. While it's certainly true that medieval Europe was a much smellier place than modern society, the idea that everyone neglected personal hygiene entirely is a vast one your nose will help us debunk. It's a foundational historical truth that medieval people did indeed practice forms of personal hygiene, even if their standards and methods differed significantly from our own. Bathing, for instance, was not entirely abandoned. Public bathhouses, though less prevalent and often viewed with suspicion after the Roman era, sometimes due to moral or disease concerns, did exist in various forms throughout the period, particularly in larger towns and cities, or associated with monasteries. For common folk, a full-body bath might be an infrequent event, perhaps once a week or even less often for the general population, depending on access to clean water, fuel for heating, and the sheer labor involved. But people certainly washed their hands and faces more regularly, especially before meals or after messy tasks. So, while you wouldn't have smelled universal floral freshness, the notion of people just rolling around in dirt without any care for personal cleanliness is largely inaccurate. They might not have used antibacterial soap, but they certainly tried to clean off the visible dirt. You might have heard the quip that medieval people only bathed once a year, whether they needed it or not. That's probably more of a joke than historical accuracy. People understood the temporary relief that water provided, even if they couldn't grasp germ theory. Imagine the feeling of washing the day's grime from your face and hands after a long day in a dusty or muddy environment. That immediate, tangible sense of relief and relative freshness would have been just as appreciated then as it is now. A rather curious, though not universal, hygiene practice involved the use of steam baths or rudimentary saunas in some northern European cultures. These were places where water was thrown onto hot stones to create steam, allowing people to sweat out impurities. While not a bath in the sense of immersion, it was a form of cleansing and likely offered a temporary sense of freshness. Beyond that, many medieval individuals, particularly those with some means, employed various herbal concoctions for their hair and skin, not just for scent, but for perceived cleansing properties. Think of concoctions with rosemary, sage, or even more abrasive elements to clean hair or exfoliate skin. These weren't just for luxury. They were practical attempts at personal care within the available scientific understanding. Modern scholarship frequently reevaluates the popular narrative surrounding medieval hygiene, seeking to differentiate between myth and historical practice. Was the great unwashed narrative simply a convenient way for later eras to feel superior? Or did it truly reflect a complete disregard for cleanliness? It's increasingly clear that medieval people, like all humans, desired to be clean too, the best of their abilities, and they employed the tools and knowledge available to them. Their definition of cleanliness was just different, often based on visible dirt and perceived freshness rather than microscopic sterility. The consistent wearing of linen undergarments, which were more easily washed than wool outer garments, also points to an understanding of personal hygiene. Changing these linens, even if the outer clothes remained unwashed for longer, would have provided a noticeable sense of freshness and reduced direct skin contact with accumulated grime. It was their version of changing your socks daily, even if you couldn't shower. So, while you would undoubtedly still encounter plenty of strong, sometimes unpleasant, smells in medieval society, it wasn't due to a universal, conscious decision to live in filth. It was a consequence of limited technology, rudimentary infrastructure, and a different understanding of health and sanitation. Medieval people, just like you, craved cleanliness, and they tried their best to achieve it with what they had. Your nose, while still working overtime, can now appreciate that the medieval world wasn't a homogeneous stink. It was a place where people made genuine, if imperfect, efforts to mitigate the inevitable aromas of their time. The myth of the great unwashed fades, replaced by a more nuanced, and perhaps more human, understanding. Having clarified that medieval people weren't entirely averse to washing, your senses now gravitate towards their more deliberate attempts to smell good. This brings us to the fascinating realm of medieval perfumery and scented oils, a world of intentional fragrance that served not just to please the nose, but to declare status, ward off perceived illness, and even add a layer of personal mystique. It is widely understood that perfumes and scented oils, often derived from precious, imported spices, aromatic herbs, and sometimes potent animal products, were used by the wealthy elite in medieval Europe. These weren't subtle spritzes from a delicate glass bottle. These were often rich, heavy concoctions designed to make a definite impression. Ingredients like frankincense, myrrh, rose, jasmine, cinnamon, and cloves would be meticulously distilled or infused into oils. For the very rich animalic notes such as musk from the musk deer, civet from the civet cat, and ambergris, a waxy substance from sperm whales, were highly prized. These animalic ingredients provided a deep, complex, and long-lasting base to perfumes, often described as rich, sensual, or even slightly fecal to a modern nose, but considered incredibly desirable and sophisticated in the Middle Ages. Imagine wearing something that subtly reminded people of a very well-fed, luxurious animal. These perfumes were applied directly to the skin, hair, and clothing, or used to scent rooms. Noble ladies might rub scented oils onto their skin after a bath, or wear pomanders filled with fragrant pastilles. Gentlemen might scent their gloves or hats. The goal was to create an aromatic aura, a personal cloud of expensive fragrance that lingered, announcing their presence long before they were seen, and lingering long after they had departed. It was like a medieval noble's version of a personal fog machine, only it smelled much, much better. A particularly intriguing aspect of medieval perfumery was the sheer potency and complexity of some of the recipes, sometimes bordering on the alchemical. Beyond simple floral infusions, elaborate instructions exist for combining dozens of ingredients, resins, spices, flowers, and the aforementioned animal extracts to create unique, signature scents. These perfumes were not just for smelling good. They were believed by some to have protective qualities against bad air, miasma, or even to boost health and vitality. So, your expensive perfume wasn't just making you smell nice. It was your invisible shield against the stink and disease of the world. A 2-for-1 deal, really. Ongoing historical analysis explores the role of scent in articulating social hierarchy and identity within medieval European courts. Was the ability to wear such potent and exotic perfumes a clear, unquestionable mark of elite status, recognized by all? Or was there a subtle disdain from some who preferred more natural or simple aromas? It's likely that while status was certainly conveyed, taste still played a role. And perhaps some found the very intense, animal-based perfumes a bit much. Even then, the development of distillation techniques, often learned from the Islamic world, gradually allowed for more refined alcoholic perfumes, but oil-based and solid perfumes remained common. These were not the airy, fleeting spritzes of modern colognes. They were often heavy, viscous, and incredibly concentrated, designed to cut through and override the pervasive background odors of the medieval environment. You'd catch a whiff of a noble passing by, and the sheer strength of their perfume would be undeniable, perhaps even a little overwhelming to your modern nose, accustomed to far more subtle fragrances. So, while the general medieval smellscape was often defined by less savory aromas, there existed a countercurrent, driven by wealth and desire, dedicated to creating and deploying powerful, intentional fragrances. These perfumes were not merely an afterthought. They were a significant part of personal presentation and social signaling. Your nose has now experienced the full spectrum, from the raw, unavoidable smells of medieval life to the deliberate, often expensive, attempts to sculpt a more pleasant, aromatic reality. It's a testament to human desire for beauty, even in the midst of overwhelming practicality. Having explored the deliberate attempts at masking medieval smells with perfumes, your nose now pivots to another fundamental category of daily aroma: the pervasive, often mouth-watering, sometimes challenging, smells of food and drink. In a world where every meal was cooked from scratch, often over an open fire, and ingredients were intensely local and seasonal, the aromas emanating from kitchens and taverns were incredibly potent and varied, defining much of the domestic and communal smells. Medieval cooking, for most, revolved around the hearth, an open fire in the center of a home or a rudimentary fireplace. This meant that the cooking process itself contributed significantly to the ambient smells. The constant scent of wood smoke, mingled with the savory, often fatty aroma of roasting or boiling meat, would permeate the air. Imagine the smell of a large joint of pork or beef slowly cooking over embers, its fat dripping and sizzling, filling the entire dwelling with a rich, almost primal aroma. For common folk, their diet revolved around potagistic, slow-cooked stews made with grains, vegetables, and whatever scraps of meat or fish were available. These would emit a constant, earthy, and deeply savory smell, sometimes with the sharp tang of onions or garlic. For the wealthier classes, the culinary world offered an even more complex aromatic tapestry. Spices, imported at great expense from the East, were used lavishly, not just for flavor, but often as a display of wealth. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and saffron would infuse dishes with heady, exotic aromas. Think of roasted meats coated in complex spice blends, or rich puddings sweetened with saffron and honey. While these were undeniably pleasant, their sheer strength and mixture with other strong flavors could be overwhelming. It was less about subtle enhancement and more about an explosion of intense, distinct aromas. A particularly unique aspect of medieval gastronomy was the frequent combination of sweet and savory elements, leading to distinct and sometimes surprising smells. Dishes like heavily spiced meat, pottages often incorporated fruits, honey, or sugar for those who could afford it, creating a complex aroma that might seem unusual to a modern palate. Imagine the smell of a chicken stew infused with plums and cinnamon, or a rich venison pie seasoned with ginger and saffron. These were not just about taste. They were about aromatic spectacle, adding another layer to the medieval sensory experience that goes beyond what your modern brain expects from a savory dish. It was an olfactory adventure in every mouthful. Ongoing historical inquiry delves into the ways in which regional culinary aromas shaped local identities and travel experiences. Could a traveler tell which region they were in just by the distinctive blend of cooking smells wafting from homes and inns? It's plausible that distinct local ingredients, cooking fuels, and culinary traditions created unique aromatic signatures for different towns and regions, making food smells a form of geographical marker. Beyond solid food, medieval drinks also contributed significantly to the smellscape. Ale and beer were staple beverages, safer to drink than often contaminated. Water, breweries, as we've noted, released strong, yeasty, fermented aromas, but even the drinks themselves had a powerful bouquet. Medieval ale, often unfiltered and made with different grains and less hops than modern beer, would have had a distinct, often sour or earthy, yeasty smell that differed greatly from the crisp, often bitter aroma of modern lagers. The smell of strong, earthy wine or mead-fermented honey would also be common, particularly in taverns or during feasts. Feasts, especially in noble households, were grand olfactory events. The sheer volume of food, often served in close proximity to guests, combined with the warmth of many bodies and the smoke from numerous candles and hearths, created an incredibly dense and overwhelming aromatic environment. It was a sensory celebration where every bite, every sip, every breath contributed to a rich, complex, and undeniable food-scented atmosphere. Your nose, by now, is adept at picking out these individual threads in the tapestry of medieval aromas, understanding that the food they ate wasn't just sustenance, but a powerful, ever-present source of defining smells. You might even find yourself craving some medieval roast, purely based on its imagined aroma. Having explored the specific aromas emanating from medieval kitchens and taverns, your senses are now about to be completely overwhelmed. You're stepping into the vibrant, chaotic, and utterly unforgettable olfactory experience of medieval markets and fairs. These were not just places of commerce. They were grand public spectacles, a melting pot of sights, sounds, and, most powerfully, smells. A microcosm where every single aroma you've encountered so far converged into an intense, dynamic, and often dizzying whole. It's a foundational understanding that markets and fairs were the beating heart of medieval communal and economic life, drawing people and goods from every corner of society. This meant that every single smell we've discussed, from human and animal waste to industrial effluvia, food, spices, and even perfumes, would be concentrated here. Imagine a bustling town square on market day. The air would be thick with the musky scent of large crowds and washed bodies, sweat and breath mingling with the earthy aroma of fresh produce from the countryside. Then, a few steps away, the pungent, metallic scents of raw meat from the butcher's stall. perhaps next to the sharp, milky sourness of cheese and the earthy, damp smell of root vegetables piled high. It was a symphony of smells, often playing in discordant harmony. Over by the livestock pens, the familiar, powerful effluvium of animals, the warm, rich scent of cows, the sharp ammonia of horse urine, the cloying aroma of pig's wood add another layer to the cacophony. Nearby, a blacksmith might be at work, lending the sharp, sulfuric smell of burning coal and hot metal. Further on, perhaps a baker's stall, emitting waves of comforting, yeasty bread, momentarily offering a delicious respite before you're hit again with something far less appealing. It was an exercise in sensory overload, a constant barrage on your nose, trying to pass individual scents from the overwhelming whole. You'd probably find your eyes watering just from the sheer volume of different aromas, a rather curious and often overwhelming sensory highlight of major medieval fairs would be the arrival of exotic goods from distant lands, each bringing its own distinctive, new and powerful smell. Think of merchants from the East unrolling bales of silk, perhaps with the faint, foreign scent of dyes or unfamiliar fibers. More powerfully, the spice vendors' stalls would be an aromatic explosion, the sweet, pungent warmth of cinnamon and cloves, the sharp, almost peppery scent of ginger, the heady aroma of rare frankincense, or the intense, slightly bitter smell of saffron. These concentrated, unfamiliar aromas would cut through the local European smells, adding an intoxicating, sometimes almost overwhelming, layer of foreignness to the market air. It was a dizzying journey for the nose, a true world tour right. In the town square, historians often reflect on the interplay between the economic vitality and the intense sensory environment of medieval marketplaces. Did the sheer volume and variety of smells contribute to the allure of the market, a vibrant, living entity that drew people in despite the less pleasant aspects? Or were they merely tolerated as a necessary evil for the sake of commerce? It's likely that these powerful aromas were an integral part of the experience, a subconscious reminder of the abundance and activity, even if you had to periodically hold your breath near the fishmonger. Even the simple act of trade added its own subtle olfactory notes. The faint metallic tang of coins constantly changing hands, the woody smell of vendors' carts, the earthy scent of unwashed hands, and the general people smell that comes from hundreds or thousands of individuals crammed into a relatively small space. There was no escaping it. You couldn't just turn off your nose, so when you consider medieval markets and fairs, don't just picture the sights and sounds. Immerse yourself in the smells. It was a place where every aspect of medieval life, agriculture, industry, personal habits, food, and even distant trade converged into a single, overwhelming, unforgettable, aromatic experience. Your nose, by this point, is a true connoisseur of medieval odors, capable of navigating this complex landscape. But even it would find a day at the medieval fair a truly exhausting, if utterly immersive, experience. You might even find yourself preferring the quiet, less aromatic corners of the countryside after such an assault. Stepping back from the bustling market, your mind begins to process a deeper, more philosophical shift that permeates this medieval world. It's not just what they smelled, but how they perceived those smells. Your modern nose, trained by centuries of sanitation and air fresheners, reacts with immediate disgust to many of the aromas you've encountered. But for medieval people, the very definition of a good or bad smell, and their tolerance for certain odors, was fundamentally different. It's a crucial historical insight that medieval people possessed a significantly higher tolerance for smells that modern individuals would find intensely offensive. This wasn't because they inherently enjoyed them, but because these odors were an unavoidable, integrated part of daily life. The smell of animal waste, human refuse, decaying organic matter, and unwashed bodies was simply the atmospheric background noise of their existence. It was as common and unremarkable as the sound of birdsong or the feel of the wind. They were not constantly recoiling in disgust because their sensory baseline was completely recalibrated. For them, a truly offensive smell might have been something far more potent, like the overwhelming stench of a dead body left to rot in the sun, or the unmistakable aroma of deep-seated disease. Imagine trying to navigate your entire day, every day, with the same level of acute olfactory discomfort you feel when you pass a modern dumpster on a hot day. You simply couldn't function. Medieval people's noses adapted. They developed a form of olfactory resilience, tuning out the persistent background odors that would overwhelm you. It's a testament to the human capacity for adaptation, proving that if you live in it long enough, even what you'd consider truly disgusting becomes just normal. A fascinating, almost poetic, aspect of their perception is how medieval texts and philosophical writings occasionally elevate or condemn smells based on moral or spiritual connotations. For instance, the smell of sanctity was a recognized concept, the belief that saints' bodies, even after death, might emit a sweet, fragrant aroma, contrasting sharply with the stench of ordinary decay, or the supposed foul odors associated with sin or demonic presence. This shows that while they accepted common smells, they also recognized powerful symbolic exceptions. It was less about a universal pleasantness and more about what a smell represented. So, if you suddenly smelled like roses after death, it probably meant you were going somewhere nice, which is a pretty good incentive for a good life, all things considered. Contemporary research actively examines the extent to which olfactory adaptation influenced medieval daily life and social interaction. Did this higher tolerance make them less sensitive to individual body odors, making close proximity less awkward? Or did the nuances of individual smells become even more telling, indicating health, social status, as with perfumes, or even moral standing? It implies a different social grammar, one where your nose was constantly, if subconsciously, gathering information that we now largely ignore. As time progressed, particularly moving towards the late medieval period and into the Renaissance, perceptions slowly began to shift. As towns grew denser and understanding of health, however rudimentary, slowly advanced, there was a gradual increase in efforts to mitigate pervasive odors. This wasn't a sudden revolution, but a slow, creeping realization that perhaps things could smell better, and that maybe extreme foulness wasn't just an unavoidable fact of life. More efficient waste removal, albeit still imperfect, and increased use of perfumes by the elite signaled a burgeoning desire for a cleaner, or at least less pungent, environment. So, your journey through medieval smells isn't just about what was there. It's about understanding how the people of that time experienced it. Their world was loud with smells, an enveloping, inescapable sensory reality. They didn't have the luxury of scent-free products or hermetically sealed environments. They lived in, worked in, and breathed in a world constantly defined by its complex, powerful aromas. Your modern nose, while initially shocked, has now gained a deeper appreciation for their resilience, and perhaps a subtle new sensitivity too. The nuances of odor that your everyday life usually filters out. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? How much we've lost, and gained in our quest for an odorless existence. Now, having spent so much time immersed in the rich, vibrant, and often challenging olfactory world of the Middle Ages, it's time to turn your nose back towards your own era. And as you do, you'll likely notice a striking difference, a profound shift, perhaps even a loss, in the acuity of your own sense of smell. Modernity, in its relentless pursuit of comfort and hygiene, has systematically minimized, masked, or eliminated many of the natural odors that medieval people lived with daily, leading to a fascinating desensitization of our noses. It's an undeniable, contemporary reality that modern society has actively, and often successfully, engineered away many natural environmental odors through vast improvements in sanitation systems, efficient waste management, widespread access to clean running water, and a veritable army of personal hygiene and household cleaning products. The pervasive organic smells of past eras have been largely eradicated from our daily lives. You rarely encounter the unfiltered stench of human waste, rotting food, or unchecked animal effluvia on your streets. Your homes are designed for ventilation and easy cleaning, and your clothes are washed with powerful detergents that leave them smelling fresh, often with artificial scents. This concerted effort means your nose is simply not required to work as hard or to tolerate as much as a medieval one. Consider your average grocery store versus a medieval market. In your world, meats are packaged, produce is pristine, and you walk on clean floors. In the medieval market, every smell was direct, visceral, and unfiltered. Your nose has been living in an olfactory bubble for generations, and stepping out of it, even in imagination, is a shock. It's like living in a world of muted colors and then suddenly being exposed to a vibrant, overwhelming painting. A rather curious manifestation of this modern, olfactory landscape is the paradoxical rise of artificial fragrances to fill the void left by natural ones. We've eliminated the real smells of nature and human activity, only to replace them with industrially produced fresh linen, ocean breeze, spring rain, or pine forest air fresheners. We crave pleasant aromas, but we often prefer them to be manufactured, controlled, and consistent, rather than the unpredictable, potent, and sometimes challenging sense of the natural world or raw human existence. It's like we've replaced a wild, untamed garden with a carefully manicured, synthetic turf. We're also strangely obsessed with eliminating smell entirely, leading to fragrance-free products and zones. Contemporary cognitive science continues to investigate the implications of our diminished olfactory landscape on memory and emotional processing. Given how powerfully smell is linked to memory and emotion, what are the long-term effects of living in a world that smells so much less intensely and so much more artificially than that of our ancestors? Are we losing a primal connection to our environment, perhaps even a subtle richness in our emotional lives, by constantly deodorizing and artificially scenting our surroundings? It's a thought that lingers, much like a medieval perfume, but perhaps with a slightly more existential tang. Think about the sheer volume of nose work a medieval person's brain had to do every single day, identifying potential dangers, the smell of smoke, decay, locating food, the smell of a bakery, a cooking fire, recognizing people, the smell of their personal aura, and navigating their environment, the smell of the tannery street. Your nose, by contrast, is mostly engaged with pleasant artificial scents, or responding with alarm to the rare bad smell that slips through the cracks of modern sanitation. So, while you might feel immense gratitude for modern plumbing and sanitation after this journey, there's also a subtle sense of something lost. the rich, unfiltered tapestry of odors that defined the medieval world. For better or worse, engage their senses in a way yours simply isn't required to. You've experienced what it means to be truly nose-aware in a way that modern life rarely demands. Your olfactory acuity, while certainly more comfortable, has perhaps become dulled, less essential to your survival or understanding of the world. It's a trade-off, isn't it? Cleanliness for vividness, comfort for constant sensory engagement. Having explored the exciting efforts to reconstruct the smellscapes of the past, your journey through medieval aromas now culminates with a profound realization. The medieval world, despite its vast differences, has left an enduring, subtle olfactory legacy that still shapes our perceptions, our language, and even our subconscious understanding of the world today. The echoes of those powerful medieval smells linger, albeit often in a faint, romanticized, or even inverted form. It's a foundational understanding that many of our common phrases and cultural associations, linking smell to concepts like filth, purity, wealth, decay, or health, have deep roots in the unfiltered, potent, olfactory experiences of the medieval period. Think of expressions like stinking rich, a phrase that subtly acknowledges the pungent reality of early wealth, perhaps from animal trade or crowded manor houses, even if it evolved to mean simply very wealthy, or foul play, where foul denotes something corrupted and unpleasant, much like a pervasive, rotten smell. Conversely, sweet innocence or the sweet smell of success draw on the association of pleasant odors with purity, virtue, and prosperity. This linguistic inheritance reveals how central smell was to their understanding of morality, status, and well-being. Our language, even now, betrays our ancestors' nasal experiences. The very concept of modern hygiene, with its fervent pursuit of odorless environments and artificial freshness, is in many ways a direct, vigorous reaction to the medieval baseline. We strive for a world where personal and environmental odors are either eliminated or replaced by manufactured, consistent fragrances. This aversion to natural smells is not innate. It's a learned cultural norm, heavily influenced by centuries of gradual improvement in sanitation that began, however imperfectly, in response to the challenges of eras like the Middle Ages. You might find it amusing that our modern clean often smells like a chemical factory, a stark contrast to the subtle damp earth of a medieval clean house. A fascinating, almost ghostly aspect of this legacy is how you can still catch subtle, lingering echoes of medieval smells in very old buildings or environments today. Walk into an ancient stone church or a medieval castle, and you might detect the faint, cool scent of damp stone, ancient dust, and centuries of human presence, diluted whisper of the past. Or pick up an old, leather-bound book and inhale the unique, slightly sweet, slightly musky aroma of aged paper and leather, reminiscent of the parchment scrolls and bindings from which medieval scribes worked. Even the deep, earthy smell of a truly ancient forest or field, untouched by modern chemicals, might carry a primeval scent that medieval peasants would have found intimately familiar. These aren't the overwhelming assaults of the past, but gentle aromatic hints, like faint memories stirring. Academic discourse continues to evaluate the extent to which our modern olfactory biases are a direct inheritance from medieval sensory experiences. Are we predisposed to find certain smells disgusting or pleasant not just biologically, but because generations before us learned these associations in a very different olfactory world? It suggests a fascinating interplay between biology and culture, where the nose, far from being a simple sensor, is a deeply encultured organ, carrying the legacy of millennia of human interaction with their scented surroundings. This journey has hopefully given you a profound, multi-sensory appreciation for the complexities of medieval life. It wasn't just visually or audibly different. It was fundamentally, inescapably, smellier. And in understanding those smells, you gain a deeper, more empathetic connection to the people who lived, loved, worked, and survived within that incredibly aromatic world. Their world was loud with smells, a constant, visceral reminder of life's raw beauty and its undeniable challenges. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps your dreams will be a little more vivid, a little more scented. You've walked through medieval streets, entered their homes, attended their markets, and breathed their air. You've learned that smell wasn't just a sense for them. It was a fundamental way of knowing, navigating, and experiencing their world. And in turn, you've gained a new, richer understanding of how powerfully our senses connect us, not only to our present, but to our incredibly aromatic past. Sweet dreams.